Have you ever wondered what it sounded like when the world moved slower? When the most exciting thing that might happen in a year was the digging of a hole in the ground? Let me take you back to a morning in the year 1287, to a village so small, it barely earned a name on any map. A place where time didn't rush forward but pooled like water in a low place, settling into the rhythms of seasons and soil. This is a story about patience, about the kind of work that leaves no heroes, no monuments worth visiting, no dramatic turning points. Just earth and stone and the steady, unremarkable effort of people who knew that some things simply need to be done. The village wakes before the sun fully clears the eastern tree line. Not because anything urgent calls them, but because this is simply when bodies stir after centuries of agrarian routine. The first sounds are not human at all. A rooster somewhere near the miller's cottage, the low complaint of cattle shifting in their enclosure, the whisper of wind through thatch that hasn't been replaced in 3 years, probably won't be replaced for 3 more. Then come the people sounds. A door scraping open on leather hinges, the shuffle of feet on packed earth, the gentle murmur of a mother speaking to a child too young to remember this day, though the child will live to be 70 and die in the same cottage where she was born. Someone coughs. Someone else is drawing water from the creek, the old creek. The one that runs low in summer and freezes in winter, and sometimes, after heavy rains, runs red with clay from the hills beyond the common fields. Today, a group of men gathers near the center of the village. Not the geographic center. Nothing here is that precise, but the social center. The spot where the path from the church meets the path to the fields, where the baker's hut slouches against the morning light like a tired old man. These men carry tools. Spades with wooden handles worn smooth by decades of hands. A pickaxe. Coils of rope that smell of hemp and horse sweat. A bucket. Its staves bound with iron that someone's father hammered out in a forge. Now cold, they're going to dig a well. Not because something terrible happened. Not because the creek dried up, or because a plague came, or because the lord of the manor demanded it. Simply because wells are good to have, and this village doesn't have one yet. And it seems like the right time? Maybe? Or maybe it's just something to do. A project to give shape to the shapeless months between spring planting and autumn harvest. When the work is steady but not urgent, when hands need occupation, and minds need the satisfaction of seeing something slowly come into being. The foreman, though he'd never call himself that, is a man named Osmond. 52 years old, which makes him ancient by the standards of this time and place. He lost 3 teeth to an abscess last winter and walks, with a slight list to the left from an injury involving a plow and a stubborn ox. He's not particularly wise. He's not particularly skilled. He's simply the one who said at the village gathering 6 weeks ago, "We ought to dig a well," and no one else wanted to argue about it. Osmond stands at the chosen spot now, looking down at the ground as if it might offer some opinion about what's to come. The earth here is packed hard from generations of feet crossing it, packed so hard that the first hours of digging will be almost harder than the deeper work to come. There's a tuft of grass growing at the edge of the spot, bent and yellow, and Osmond stares at it for a long moment before nodding to no one in particular. Here then he says, no one cheers. No one marks the moment. One of the younger men, Walter, 16, and still growing into shoulders that seem too wide for the rest of him, steps forward and places the tip of his spade against the earth. He pauses, shifts his weight, tests the angle, and then, with the kind of effort that's neither dramatic nor easy, he drives the spade down into the quiet earth. The sound it makes is dull, solid, a thunk that carries no echo. No poetry, just the simple report of iron meeting earth. Walter levers the handle, lifts a wedge of soil, and turns it aside. The dirt is pale brown, almost gray, crumbly and dry on top, but darker underneath, hinting at moisture that lives deeper than most roots reach. And that's how it begins, not with ceremony, not with speeches or plans drawn on parchment or promises about what this well will mean for future generations, just a spade in earth, and the low conversation of men who have known each other their entire lives and therefore have very little urgent to say. The morning light strengthens, The rooster crows again, apparently dissatisfied with his first attempt. Somewhere a baby cries and then stops. And the digging continues, slow and rhythmic as breathing. As forgettable as yesterday, as necessary as rain, what none of them know yet is that this work will take months, that it will outlast 2 village weddings, 1 funeral, and the birth of twins to the smith's daughter, that it will become so familiar, so woven into the fabric of daily routine, that people will stop noticing it at all, will walk past the growing hole in the earth without thought. The way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing, that this well, when it's finally finished, will serve the village for 300 years, will water children who haven't been born yet, will outlast the names of every person here today, will become so ordinary that no one will remember it was ever not here. But on this morning, there is only the first hole, the first interruption in the surface of the world, and the quiet, unremarkable work of making something from nothing, one shovelful at a time, with no one watching, no one recording, no one remembering anything at all except that it was summer, and the earth was hard, and someone had to dig. The sun climbs higher, the work continues, and in the growing shadow at the bottom of that first shallow depression, the future begins to pool like water in a new-made hollow, dark and cool and patient as stone. ... Water is strange when you stop to think about it. We know this now, in our time, with our understanding of molecules and chemistry and the hydrologic cycle. But in 1287, in a village barely large enough to warrant a parish church, water was stranger still, not because people understood it less, but because they understood it differently, through necessity and nearness, through the daily intimacy of depending on something that could vanish or flood, that could heal or sicken, that was both the most ordinary thing in the world and also somehow sacred. The village had water, of course. It wouldn't exist otherwise. A creek ran along the southern boundary, carving a shallow channel through clay and shale, appearing each morning like a gray-brown ribbon threaded through the green and gold patchwork of fields. In spring, when snow melt from distant hills swelled its flow, you could hear it from the church. A low, constant whisper that old women said sounded like prayers. In summer, it diminished to a trickle that barely turned the miller's wheel. In winter, it became a motionless white scar, ice thick enough to walk on, though no one did because there was nowhere on the other side worth going. People went to the creek multiple times each day. Women in the morning, carrying wooden buckets that grew heavier with every step home, the water sloshing against the staves, wetting the hems of their skirts. Children in the afternoon, sent to fetch water for cooking, for washing, for the small necessities of medieval life. They'd dawdle at the creek bank, poking sticks into the mud, catching newts in their hands, feeling the cold water numbing their fingers even in July, men less often, but still regularly watering the oxen, filling troughs for the pigs, soaking leather before working it. But a creek is not reliable. Ask anyone who has lived by one. It floods, it dries, it freezes, and more than that, it belongs to everyone and therefore to no one. There's always someone upstream washing wool, fouling the water with lanolin and dirt. Always livestock drinking and defecating in the shallows. Always the risk that whatever flows into the creek upstream from the manor house, from the tannery in the next village, from whatever seeps out of the earth itself, will arrive in your bucket uninvited. A well, though. A well is different. A well is yours. Or at least, it's the village's, which is almost the same thing in a place where the village is all there is. A well doesn't care about the weather, at least not in the immediate, urgent way a creek does. It reaches down past the surface troubles, down into the dark, patient reservoirs that exist beneath the fields, beneath the forests, beneath the bones of the world. Water from a well is colder, cleaner, somehow more certain. It tastes different, clearer, sharper, with a mineral edge that speaks of stone and depth and the slow, filtered passage through layers of earth that have been there since before the church. Before the village, before anything human walked here at all, and more than that. A well is permanence. A creek can change course. It has happened before, will happen again, when floods carve new channels and leave old ones dry as dust. But a well is commitment. Once you dig a well, you're saying, this is where we are. This is where we'll stay. This hole in the earth is an anchor, tying us to this particular spot, this particular arrangement of soil and sky. Our children will drink here, and their children. And strangers will never meet, drawing water on mornings we can't imagine. In a future that extends beyond the limits of our thinking, the conversation about digging a well had started months earlier. In the slow accumulation of small complaints that eventually, gradually, becomes consensus. Old Margaret, whose cottage sits farthest from the creek, mentioning her knees, how the walk gets longer every year. The baker noting that water for his bread comes from a creek that sometimes tastes of mud and sometimes of things he can't identify and doesn't want to. The priest new to the village, sent from somewhere south where things were different, expressing surprise that a community of 67 souls lacked its own well, as if this were some kind of failure of ambition or piety. At first, people resisted, not because they opposed the idea, but because opposing change is the natural human condition, especially in places where change comes rarely and often brings trouble. Wells are work. Wells are expensive, at least in terms of the only currency that matters here: time and effort. Wells can fail. You dig and find nothing, or find water so deep it's unreachable, or find water that tastes of iron and makes everyone sick. Better the creek you know than the well you hope for, but slowly. Through the winter months when work is scarce and conversations are long, the idea took root. Someone mentioned that the manor house, 2 miles distant, had a well. Someone else recalled a village they'd visited once, years ago, where a well stood in the center of the common, stone-lined and deep, and how everyone there seemed just slightly less burdened by the daily necessity of water. The priest, to his credit, didn't push, but he also didn't let the idea die, mentioning it occasionally, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. By spring, the decision had been made without anyone quite noticing when the making happened. They would dig a well. Not immediately. There was planting to do first, and repairs from winter damage, and all the other urgent work that farming demands. But soon, in summer perhaps, when the days were long and the ground was softer and there was time, precious time, to spend on something that wasn't strictly necessary, but might someday become indispensable. So they waited. And the waiting itself became part of the process, part of the slow accumulation of intention that characterizes medieval life. People began to think of themselves as a village that would soon have a well. They began to imagine it, the wooden frame, the rope, the first bucket drawn. Children asked questions about wells, how deep they were, whether you could see the bottom, whether things lived down there in the dark. Old men who remembered wells from other places offered advice, most of it contradictory. All of it absorbed into the collective pool of partial knowledge that would guide the work. And now, finally, the morning has arrived. The earth has been broken. The work has begun. And somewhere in the back of everyone's mind is the same thought, unspoken but present. This will change things. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the small accumulating ways that matter most. Water will be closer. Water will be cleaner. Water will be theirs, drawn from darkness into light. Day after day, year after year, as certain as anything can be, in a world where certainty is rarer than we'd like and more precious than gold. The creek will still be there. Of course, flowing or not flowing according to its own logic, its own seasons. But it will become secondary, a backup, a memory of how things used to be. And the well still just a shallow depression in the hard-packed earth. Still more idea than reality will become the new center, the news source, the place where the village goes to meet itself. Bucket by bucket, morning after morning, in the slow, patient drawing of water from stone. But first, they have to dig. And digging, as it turns out, is much more complicated than simply making a hole in the ground, ... It's easy from this distance of centuries to imagine that the spot was chosen with science, or at least with some kind of systematic reasoning. But this is 1287. The word geology doesn't exist yet. The water table is not a concept anyone has named, though everyone understands that water exists beneath the earth, somewhere, at depths that vary by location and season and the mysterious will of whatever governs such things. So how do you choose where to dig a well when you don't have instruments, don't have maps, don't have any knowledge except what's been passed down through generations of people who themselves were guessing, testing, hoping? You argue about it. For weeks, the first suggestion came from Osmond, which makes sense because Osmond suggested the well in the first place and now feels a kind of ownership over the project. He wants to dig near the church, just off the path that leads to the cemetery, in a spot that's level and central and seems to his eye as likely as any. He can't say why it seems likely. It just does. There's a feeling about it, a rightness. Though whether that feeling comes from some ancient instinct about groundwater or simply from the convenience of the location is impossible to say. The priest disagrees. Not confrontationally, no one here confronts anyone directly if it can be avoided, but persistently, in the gentle, stubborn way of clergy. He thinks the well should be closer to the church itself, perhaps even in the small yard beside the building, where pilgrims and travelers might access it easily. Water and church, he suggests, have always been connected. Baptism, blessing, the well at the temple. Surely God would favor a well placed near his house. But the practical people, which is to say, nearly everyone else, point out that digging near the church means digging in consecrated ground, which feels wrong even if no one can articulate exactly why. And besides, the ground there is rocky, everyone knows that. You can see stones poking through the grass like the bones of the earth itself. Better to dig somewhere softer, somewhere the earth might welcome the spade rather than resist it. So they walk the village. All of them, or at least all the men, plus a few women who have opinions and aren't shy about sharing them, which in 1287 is unusual enough to be noteworthy, but not so unusual that anyone makes a fuss. They walk slowly, studying the ground as if it might reveal its secrets through patient observation. They notice things, where grass grows thickest, where the soil seems darker, where water pools after rain, and where it drains away quickly. Someone suggests the spot near the baker's hut, where the ground slopes just slightly and seems perpetually damp. But the baker objects too close to his oven. He says too much traffic, too much disruption to his work. Never mind that his work consists of baking perhaps 24 loaves a day, and that the presence of a well would likely bring more customers, not fewer. This is his space, his domain, and he doesn't want a hole in it. Someone else suggests the far edge of the common field, near the ancient oak that everyone uses for navigation and storytelling and sheltering from summer storms. But that's too far, others say. The whole point of a well is convenience. If you have to walk as far to the well as you currently walk to the creek, what's the advantage? Days pass like this. Conversations circle and return to the same points. Advantages are weighed against disadvantages. Superstitions surface. Don't dig where a building used to stand, because the spirits of old walls resist new digging. Don't dig where three paths meet, because that's where the boundary between this world and others grows thin. Don't dig directly north of the church, because north is the devil's direction. Everyone knows that, even if no one can quite remember where that knowledge came from. Then old Alred speaks up. Alred is 70 if he's a day, bent and slow and quieter than he used to be. But people listen when he talks because age grants authority here in ways we've mostly forgotten. He remembers, he says, that his grandfather once mentioned a well digger who came through the region, half a century back or more, before the last big frost, before the year the barley failed. This well digger, according to grandfather, according to memory, according to the unreliable chains of oral history, had a method for finding water. A stick, Alred says. A forked branch from a willow tree, held loosely in both hands, walked slowly across the ground, where water runs beneath the earth. The stick pulls downward, bends toward the source. Guided by forces no one understands, but everyone has seen work. Sometimes, when conditions are right and belief is strong enough, dowsing. We'd call it that today, and we'd probably dismiss it as superstition, pseudoscience. The human tendency to find patterns in randomness. But in 1287, it's in a village where the line between the natural and supernatural is gossamer thin and constantly crossed, dowsing seems perfectly reasonable. If God can turn water into wine, surely water can make a stick bend. If saints can work miracles, surely the earth can speak in its own slow way. To those patient enough to listen, so they find a willow. Actually, there are several willows near the creek. Their roots drinking constantly from the water they love, their branches trailing in the current like the hair of drowned maidens in the stories people tell when darkness falls. Walter, the young strong one, climbs one of these willows and cuts a forked branch. Way-shaped and green, still flexible with life. He brings it to Alred, who holds it carefully, testing its weight and balance, and then hands it to Osmond. "You walk," Alred says. "I'm too old for mysteries." Osmond takes the branch. He skeptically can see it in his face. In the way he holds the thing at arm's length like it might bite him, but he's also pragmatic. If this is what it takes to make a decision, he'll do it. He grips the two prongs of the Y loosely, as Alred instructs, letting the long end point forward like a spear or a divining pointer. And then he walks. Slowly, across the common ground, past the baker's hut, near the church, back toward the center. People follow, watching the stick, watching Osmond's face, watching each other to see if anyone believes this is really happening. The stick doesn't move. Osmond walks more, veers left, tries different ground. Still nothing. He's starting to feel foolish now, you can tell. Starting to wish he'd never agreed to this nonsense, but then, near the spot where the paths meet, not far from where Osmond originally suggested, the stick twitches, just slightly. A quiver that might be imagination, or wind, or the trembling of Osmond's own hands. He stops, backs up, approaches again. And yes, there it is again, a definite pull, the long end of the branch dipping toward the earth as if drawn by invisible weight. "Here," Osmond says, and his voice carries a mix of surprise and relief. "Here, I think. Does it mean anything? Is there really water beneath this spot, rushing through hidden channels or pooled in caverns of limestone, waiting to be found? Or is the stick responding to nothing more than the hope of the people watching, the collective desire for an answer, any answer, so the arguing can stop and the work can begin? In the end, it doesn't matter. The stick has spoken, or Osmond's hands have spoken through the stick, or the earth itself has spoken through Osmond. Through the stick, through the hopes of 67 people, need water and are willing to believe in small magics if those magics move them forward. The spot is chosen. This is where they'll dig. But before anyone lifts a spade, there's one more step. The priest insists, gently but firmly, that the spot be blessed. So they wait while he returns to the church, merging moments later with his worn leather satchel containing the tools of his trade. He sprinkles Water Creek water, ironically, since they don't have well water yet, in the shape of a cross over the chosen ground. He mutters prayers in Latin that most people don't understand but which sound proper and official and therefore comforting. He asks God to bless this work, to guide their hands, to grant them water in abundance and safety in the digging. And then he steps back, nods to Osmond, and the work, at last, truly begins. The first spade cuts the earth on a Tuesday morning in early June. The ground here is, as hoped, softer than near the church packed, but not impossible, clay-rich and damp just beneath the dry surface. It's not easy work, but it's possible work, which is all anyone asks. They dig in shifts, 3 or 4 men at a time, rotating every few hours. Because digging is exhausting, and there's other work that still needs doing: fields to tend, animals to care for, the 1,000 small tasks that keep medieval life functioning. The hole grows slowly, a circular depression about 3 feet across. Chosen not for any scientific reason, but because 3 feet seems right, wide enough to work in, narrow enough that the stonework later won't require impossible amounts of material. By midday that first Tuesday, the hole is perhaps a foot deep. By evening, 2 feet. The dirt they excavate is piled beside the hole, a growing mound that will later need to be distributed somewhere. It's probably spread across the fields or used to fill low spots in the paths. Nothing is wasted here. Everything has a use, eventually, or at least a place to be put until a use emerges. And as the sun sets on that first day of digging, casting long shadows across the village, across the hole that's beginning to interrupt the surface of the world, There's a sense, quiet, unspoken, but present, that something has shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but in that deep interior way that matters most. They've begun. They've committed. And there's no turning back now. No saying maybe we shouldn't have. Because the earth is already open, and the work is already underway, and all that remains is to continue. Day after day, shovelful after shovelful, until they reach water or stone or some limit they haven't yet imagined. ... Let's pause here. While the hole is still shallow and the work is still new, and consider the tools. Because in a story like this, tools matter. They're not just objects, but extensions of the body, partners in the work. Things with their own histories and futures that will outlast most of the people using them. The spades come first. There are 3 of them, all slightly different, all old. The oldest belonged to Osmond's father, and his father before that, a blade of iron hammered flat and shaped by some long-dead blacksmith, whose name is lost, but whose work endures. The handle is ashwood, pale and straight-grained, worn smooth by decades of hands gripping it in the same places. There's a groove in the wood, just above where the blade attaches. From the repeated friction of thumbs that have rubbed the same spot thousands of times, when you hold this spade, you're holding all those hands, all those previous diggers, their work and weariness soaked into the grain. The second spade is newer, maybe 20 years old, with a blade that's slightly wider and a handle that hasn't yet developed the deep polish of long use. It belongs to the village collectively, kept in a shed behind the church, along with other common tools. Scythes, hoes, a saw that's missing some teeth. This spade has a crack in the handle, about 6 inches from the top, wrapped tightly with twine to keep it from splitting further. The crack happened 2 years ago when someone used the spade to pry up a stone, and the wood betrayed its strength. But the twine holds, and the spade still works. And there's something admirable about that, the refusal to be finished. The insistence on usefulness despite damage. The third spade is newer still. Made just last autumn by the blacksmith in the next village over. Traded for a sack of wheat and a promise of future work. Its blade is darker, almost black, and still carries the geometric patterns of the hammer blows that shaped it. The handle is oak this time, heavier than ash, less flexible, but more durable. No one likes using this spade much yet. It's too new, too stiff, hasn't learned the rhythm of digging. Give it time, old Alred says. Give it a season or 2, and it'll be as good as any. Besides the spades, there's a pickaxe. This is crucial, because beneath the topsoil, beneath the layer of dark earth that crumbles easily and smells of life, lies clay. And beneath the clay, eventually, inevitably, will come rock. The pickaxe is heavy 15 pounds of iron on the end of a thick hickory handle. One side of the head comes to a sharp point for breaking rock. The other is a flat blade for prying and chopping through roots. Using it is exhausting. You swing it overhead, bringing it down with all the force your back and shoulders can generate. And most of the time it bounces off the earth with a jarring impact that travels up your arms and into your teeth. But sometimes, when the angle is right and the ground cooperates, it sinks deep, cracking through layers, opening the earth like breaking bread. There are buckets, 5 of them, wooden, held together with iron bands that the blacksmith tightened last spring. They're all slightly different sizes because they were made by different coopers at different times for different purposes. But they've been repurposed for this work. The largest can hold perhaps 3 gallons. The smallest barely 2. They're carried by rope handles that creak when weight is added. Water sloshes out of them when they're full. Dirt collects in their corners and the gaps between staves. Has to be cleaned out regularly, or it dries there and makes the buckets weaker. Rope. So much rope. Thick rope braided from hemp, slightly sticky with the plant oils that give it strength. Rope for lowering buckets into the growing hole. Rope for climbing down when the hole gets too deep to reach from the surface. Rope for pulling workers out when they're exhausted and can't quite manage the climb themselves. The village has about 60 feet of good rope, which seems like plenty now, but might not be, depending on how deep they need to go. If they need more, someone will have to visit the market town, 2 days walk away and buy or trade for additional length. But that's a worry for later. There's a small ladder hastily constructed from rough-cut boards and wooden pegs. It's only about 6 feet long. It's meant for the intermediate depth when the hole is too deep to climb easily, but not so deep that rope is necessary. The ladder is awkward, too heavy to move quickly, too light to be entirely stable. It'll probably be rebuilt several times before this work is done. And there are smaller tools. A chisel for shaping stone later, when the lining begins. A mallet for driving the chisel. A level, just a simple wooden frame with a string and weight for ensuring the walls stay vertical. A measuring rope, knotted at regular intervals, for tracking depth. None of these tools is sophisticated. None would impress anyone from our time. But each is perfectly suited to its task, refined through centuries of similar work, shaped by the same forces of trial and error that shape everything humans make. The tools are stored carefully each night, laid out near the hole, covered with canvas if rain threatens, inspected for damage. The iron gets wiped clean of dirt and moisture to prevent rust. The wooden handles are checked for cracks. The rope is coiled properly, not left tangled or kinked. This isn't sentimentality, it's survival. Good tools are expensive, irreplaceable, except through significant effort. Lose a spade to rust or breakage, and the work stops until a replacement can be found or made. Care for the tools, and they'll care for you. It's a transaction older than memory. There's a rhythm to the tool use that develops quickly. One person digging with the spade, loosening the earth. Another with the pickaxe, breaking through harder layers. A third filling buckets with the loose dirt, hooking them to rope. A fourth at the surface, hauling the buckets up. Emptying them onto the growing dirt pile, lowering the empty buckets back down. And a fifth person, usually older or less strong, keeping track of the measuring rope, monitoring depth, ensuring the hole stays straight. This rotation continues for hours. No one talks much while working. There's a kind of meditative quality to it, a focus that words would interrupt. Occasionally someone grunts with effort. Occasionally someone warns about a loose rock or a bucket coming up. But mostly there's just the sounds of work, metal striking earth, dirt sliding into buckets, rope creaking under weight. Breathing. The first day feels significant, even though nothing particularly significant happens. It's just digging, just the movement of earth from one place to another. The slow excavation of a hole that might eventually become something useful. But there's a freshness to it, a novelty that won't last, but which colors these early hours with something almost like excitement. The morning arrives. Cool and clear. One of those summer days when the air hasn't yet remembered how to be heavy with heat. Dew clings to the grass around the chosen spot. And when Walter places his spade against the earth, the same earth that was blessed yesterday, though it looks no different than any other earth, the blade comes away dark and slightly damp. The soil here, just beneath the surface crust, is loamy. That's not a word anyone in the village would use, but it's what we'd call it. Earth rich with decomposed matter. Soft enough to yield to the spade, but substantial enough to hold its shape when lifted. It's the color of wet bark. Almost black when first exposed, but fading to brown as it dries on the growing pile beside the hole. Osmond supervises, which mostly means standing nearby and occasionally saying things. It's like steady now, or mind the edges, or offering opinions that everyone politely ignores. He's not trying to be controlling, he simply doesn't know what else to do with his hands. With his sense of responsibility for this project that he initiated, and which now seems to have a momentum of its own, besides Walter, there are 3 other men working this morning. Godwin, who's 30 and built like an ox, and speaks so rarely that some of the children think he might be mute. Hugh, who's a bit older and constantly complains about his back but never stops working. And Simon, who's younger than Walter, but not as strong, who tends to dig in short, intense bursts, followed by long rests. Who'll probably never make a good farmer, but whose father keeps hoping anyway. They fall into a rhythm without planning it. Walter cuts the earth in a rough circle, following the perimeter that was marked yesterday with small stones. Godwin follows behind, deepening the cut. His spade biting 6 inches deeper than Walter's, Hugh and Simon fill buckets with the loose earth, which at this shallow depth they can simply lift out by hand and dump onto the pile. It's easy work, relatively speaking. The kind of work where you can let your mind wander, can think about other things, or nothing at all. Can exist in the simple physical loop of effort and movement. The pile grows. By mid-morning, it's knee-high. A mound of dark earth studded with small stones and the occasional root. Crawling with disturbed beetles and earthworms that twist in the sudden brightness. Children gather to watch, as children always do when something unusual is happening. They shoot away periodically, but drift back. Drawn by curiosity and the possibility that something interesting might occur, though nothing interesting does. The smell of the work is distinctive, fresh earth, mineral, and organic at once. Mixed with the sweat of the diggers and the dry dust that rises when buckets are emptied, it's not unpleasant. Actually, there's something deeply satisfying about it. Something primordial, the smell of the earth being opened, of the ground revealing what it usually keeps hidden by noon. The hole is perhaps 18 inches deep and roughly circular, about 3 feet across as planned. The men pause for their midday meal, which is brought by the women bread and cheese and weak ale, the standard fare that fuels medieval labor. They sit in the shade of the baker's hut, not talking much. Just eating and resting and letting backs recover from the morning's bending. Walter's hands are already developing blisters. The spade handle rubs against his palms. He examines them during the break, pressing the fluid-filled bubbles, deciding whether to pop them or let them be. Hugh advises leaving them, they'll harden into calluses soon enough. And calluses are what you want, or what separate boys from men who work. So Walter leaves them, though they sting every time he grips the spade afterward. The afternoon shift brings different workers. Thomas, who's 40 and perpetually cheerful in a way that sometimes irritates people. Alred's grandson, whose name is also Alred, but whom everyone calls young Alred even though he's 28. And Matthew, who's the smith's son and stronger than he looks, with forearms like rope from working the bellows since childhood. The afternoon earth is different from the morning earth. Drier, for one thing, the sun has baked the exposed surfaces, making the top layer of the hole crusty and harder to penetrate. But beneath that crust, the soil remains workable, still yielding to the spade with satisfying resistance, neither too hard nor too soft. They encounter their first root around 2 hours past noon. It's thick as a man's thumb, pale and fibrous, running horizontally through the hole about 2 feet down. It belongs to something, probably one of the oaks that grows nearby, its root system spreading far beyond its canopy. Searching for water and stability in the dark underground spaces where tree roots live their secret lives. The root has to be cut. They try prying it out first, working spades underneath it. Levering upward, but it holds firm, anchored at both ends beyond the circumference of the hole. So Matthew fetches a small axe, and young Alred chops through the root in a dozen strokes, each one sending a shudder through the living wood, each one releasing a smell that's sharper than soil, more alive, the smell of sap and injury. When the root is severed, they pull the cut section free. It's surprisingly heavy, waterlogged, and dense. They toss it onto the dirt pile, where it'll dry over the coming weeks, eventually becoming just another piece of kindling, or perhaps rotting back into the soil it came from. The holes where the root entered and exited the excavation are packed with loose dirt, and the digging continues. This is the pattern that establishes itself. Dig until you hit an obstacle. Deal with the obstacle, resume digging. Most obstacles are small stones the size of fists. Roots of various thicknesses, occasionally a layer of clay that requires the pickaxe to break through. Nothing is insurmountable. Everything slows the work, but nothing stops it. By evening of this first full day, the hole is 3 feet deep. Deep enough that when Simon stands in it, only his head and shoulders protrude above ground level. Deep enough that the earth around him is no longer just surface soil, but something older, darker, more compressed. The walls of the hole show layers now, the thin, dark topsoil, then the paler subsoil, then the beginning of clay. Orange, brown, and slick when wet. They climb out, all of them, and stand looking at what they've made. It's not much. Just a hole. But it's a hole that wasn't there yesterday. A new feature of the landscape. A small but definite alteration of the world. And there's satisfaction in that. In the visible proof of work done, progress made. In the simple fact that something is changed because they decided to change it. Osman makes a mark on his measuring rope. Simple, not tied at the 3-foot point. Each day they'll measure, he says, and add a new knot, so they'll have a record of depth. A physical representation of progress that can be seen and felt. It's not a sophisticated system, but it's enough. The tools are cleaned and stored. The workers drift toward their homes, toward evening meals and rest. The hole sits open under the darkening sky, a small circle of shadow, a beginning. And tomorrow, they'll return. And the day after that, and the day after that, and the hole will grow deeper, inch by stubborn inch, at the pace that medieval time allows, which is to say, slowly. But with the inevitability of water-wearing stone, persistent and patient and impossible to hurry. 3 weeks into the work, the hole is 9 feet deep. This doesn't sound like much 9 feet in 21 days. Less than 6 inches per day, but anyone who's ever dug a hole knows that depth is deceiving. The first few feet are always easiest. You're working from the surface, tossing dirt out with a simple motion, standing in sun and air, able to step in and out easily. But as the hole deepens, everything becomes harder. At 9 feet, you can no longer simply throw dirt out. The buckets become essential, lowered on ropes that have to be carefully managed to avoid tangling. Each bucket load requires multiple people. One in the hole filling, one above hauling, one emptying. The coordination becomes a kind of dance, wordless and rhythmic, developed through repetition until it's nearly automatic. The ladder lives in the hole now. Leaning against one wall, its top protruding just high enough for hands to grip. Climbing down isn't difficult, but climbing out after hours of digging, muscles trembling with exhaustion, is another matter. More than once, someone has needed help, a rope around the chest, a pull from above to make the final ascent. There's no shame in it. The work is simply hard, harder than it seemed it would be, harder than anything most of these men have done before. The light at the bottom of the hole is different from surface light. Even at noon, with the sun directly overhead, there's a quality of shadow down there, a dimness that makes it hard to see clearly. They work by feel as much as sight, the spade finding obstacles before eyes do. Hands reading the texture of earth through wooden handles. Sometimes someone calls for more light, and a candle is lowered in a protective lantern. But candles are expensive, and the lantern is clumsy. So mostly, they simply accept the dimness as part of the work. Sound changes too. Everything echoes slightly in the enclosed space, voices bouncing off earthen walls, the strike of pickaxe on stone ringing louder than it would on the surface. But surface sounds grow distant, the village noises, the animals. The wind replaced by the immediate, intimate sounds of breathing and digging, and the small movements of earth, falling from spade to bucket. The diggers develop preferences about where and when they work. Some like the morning shift, when the air in the hole is coolest and their muscles are freshest. Others prefer afternoon, claiming they need time to wake up properly before descending into darkness. A few, the strongest or most stubborn, will work both morning and afternoon, though everyone agrees this is foolish. That exhaustion leads to mistakes, and mistakes in a deep hole can be dangerous, because it is dangerous, though no one speaks of this directly. The walls, though they feel solid, are just compacted earth. They could collapse. A person could be buried, suffocated, killed in seconds. So far it hasn't happened, but the possibility hangs in the air like the dust that rises with each spade thrust. They work carefully, constantly checking the walls, packing down any loose sections, avoiding anything that might undermine stability. At 10 feet deep, preached on the 25th day of digging, they hit their first serious obstacle, a boulder. Not a large one, perhaps 18 inches across, but embedded so firmly in the clay surrounding it that it might as well be part of the earth's core. They try prying it loose with the pickaxe. They tried digging around it, exposing its edges, finding purchase points. They try levering it with thick branches brought from the forest and wedged beneath its bulk. Nothing works. The stone refuses to move. For 2 days, they struggle with it, trying everything anyone can think of. Godwin suggests breaking it with hammer and chisel, but the stone is granite or something equally hard, and their chisels are meant for softer limestone. Young Alred proposes digging around it, leaving it as a feature in the wall. But the stone occupies too much of the hole's diameter. Working around it would make the shaft too narrow. Finally, on the 3rd day of the boulder struggle, old Alred himself descends into the hole. He's not been down before his age, and his knees make climbing ladders unwise, but he wants to see the problem firsthand. He spends 10 minutes at the bottom, running his hands over the stone, testing its position, thinking. Fire, he says finally. Heat it, then cold water. The shock cracks stone. It's an old technique, ancient even in 1287, used by quarrymen and builders when other methods fail. They gather wood-dry branches and kindling and build a small fire directly against the boulder's exposed face. The fire burns for hours, tended carefully so it doesn't spread, but maintained hot enough that the stone begins to glow. The smoke is terrible, filling the hole and rising in a dark column that makes people cough and eyes stream. But they persist. When the stone is thoroughly heated, you can feel the radiating warmth from feet away. They douse it with cold creek water carried in buckets. The water hits the hot stone with an explosive hiss, turning instantly to steam, and somewhere deep in the boulder's structure, something gives. A crack appears, hairline thin, running from one edge toward the center. Another bucket of water, another hiss, and the crack widens, extends, branches by evening. The boulder has split into 3 pieces, each small enough to be levered out and hauled to the surface. The pieces are heavy. It takes for men to lift the largest but manageable. They're added to a new pile forming near the dirt mound. A collection of stones that will eventually be used for something, though no one's quite sure what yet. Nothing is wasted. The victory over the boulder lifts everyone's spirits. It's proof that obstacles can be overcome, that patience and old knowledge still work, that the earth might resist but won't refuse entirely. They celebrate with an extra ration of ale that evening, and the priest says a prayer of thanksgiving. And for a few hours, the work feels less like an endless repetitive burden and more like an adventure, a conquest, a story worth living through. But the next day, the work returns to its usual rhythm. Dig, fill, haul, empty, repeat. The hole deepens. 12 feet. 13 feet. The rope stretches longer. The climb out takes more time. The pile of earth grows taller and wider, spreading like a slow stain across the ground beside the hole at 14 feet. They're deeper than any of them has ever been underground while still being able to see the sky. The circle of light above looks small now, distant, like looking up from the bottom of a well, which is of course exactly what they're doing. The thought makes Walter laugh, briefly, before the work swallows the moment. The earth down here is different again. Still clay mostly, but mixed with bands of something else, silt, maybe, or very fine sand, gray-brown and almost smooth to the touch. It's harder to dig, requiring more force with the pickaxe, but it also seems more stable, less likely to collapse. The walls are nearly vertical now, kept straight by constant checking with the weighted string level, and they've begun to look almost intentional, almost crafted rather than merely dug at 15 feet. Someone calculates that they've removed approximately 40 cubic feet of earth. This means nothing to them in those terms, but they can see it in the pile, which is now taller than a person and spreading into the space where children used to play. The earth weighs something no one knows exactly how much, but moving it has required thousands of bucket hauls, tens of thousands of individual motions, muscles contracting and releasing, hands gripping and lifting, backs bending and straightening. 15 feet, and still no water. No hint of it, no dampness in the earth, no seepage pooling at the bottom. They expected this, or at least hoped for it. Water that comes too soon can make digging impossible, can flood the work before it's properly begun. But still, there's a small gnawing worry. What if the dowsing was wrong? What if they dig and find nothing, just dry earth extending downward forever? Their work pointless, their summer wasted? But they don't voice these worries. They simply dig. Because what else is there to do? They've committed. The hole exists. And turning back now would mean admitting failure, abandoning effort, accepting that sometimes work leads nowhere. So they continue, descending into the earth. Day after day, in the slow, patient rhythm that defines their lives. Trusting that somewhere below, somewhere in the darkness, they're excavating toward water waits. ... At 17 feet, they reach the point where the earthen walls are no longer sufficient. This has been anticipated. Everyone knows that wells need stone lining, need something more permanent than compressed clay to hold back the earth and keep the shaft stable. But knowing something needs to happen and actually making it happen are very different things. The stones have to be gathered first. Not just any stones, they need flat ones, or at least stones with one flat face that can form a relatively smooth wall. And they need to be the right size, large enough to be substantial, small enough to be maneuvered into position. Too big and they can't be lowered into the hole. Too small and the wall will be weak, prone to shifting and collapse. They find stones in several places. The creek bed has them, rounded by water, but some with good flat surfaces. The edges of the fields yield stones that farmers have been piling for generations, clearing them from planting areas because rocks and plows don't agree. There's an old wall half collapsed on the boundary of the village lands. And after some debate about whether it's acceptable to cannibalize it, they decide that yes, those stones can be repurposed. The wall served its purpose. Now the stones will serve a new one. Collecting the stones takes days. They're carried by hand, by wooden sledges, by whatever method works. Each stone is examined, turned over, assessed for its fitness. The best ones are set aside near the hole. By the time they have what seems like enough, there's a substantial pile, hundreds of stones, ranging from the size of a bread loaf to the size of a small child. They look like nothing much, just a heap of rock. But they represent possibility, the raw material of permanence. The mortar is another challenge. Medieval mortars isn't what we'd recognize today. It's lime-based. It's made by burning limestone in a kiln until it becomes quicklime, then mixing it with water and sand. The village doesn't have a lime kiln, but the manor house does. And after some negotiations, some days of labor owed in return, some promises made, they acquire 3 large baskets of lime. The lime is mixed with sand from the creek bed and water into a paste that smells sharp and chemical. Nothing like the earth they've been digging through. Its caustic burns skin if you're not careful, leaves white marks on clothing that never quite wash out. They work with it carefully, respectfully, aware that this substance is what will hold everything together, what will turn a pile of individual stones into a wall. The first course of stones is laid at the bottom of the hole at 17 feet. Hugh descends with a basket of mortar, and Walter follows with an armload of stones. Each one chosen from the pile above and carefully lowered on ropes to prevent cracking. The bottom of the hole has been cleared and leveled as much as possible, creating a floor for the stonework to rest on. Hugh spreads mortar in a rough circle, perhaps 3 inches thick. Then Walter places the first stone, pressing it into the mortar, wiggling it to set it firmly, checking with his hands that it's level. Then the second stone, placed adjacent to the first, a thin line of mortar between them. Then the third. Slowly, patiently, the first circle of stones takes shape. It's harder than it looks. The stones are irregularly shaped, so fitting them together is like solving a puzzle where the pieces don't quite match. Some stones need to be turned multiple times before the right face settles into place. Some gaps are too wide and need smaller stones to fill them. Some stones are too thick and need to be shimmed up with extra mortars or thin stone chips. They work in near darkness. With a candle lantern providing the only light, their hands become white with lime residue, cracked and sore from handling rough stone. The air in the hole is close, hard to breathe, thick with stone dust and lime smell, and the closeness that comes from being deep underground by the end of the first day of stone laying. They've completed one course, one ring of stones, perhaps 8 inches tall, circling the interior of the hole. It doesn't look like much, but it's a beginning, a foundation. The first permanent thing about this well that will last beyond their lifetimes. The second day, the second course. The stones for this ring are chosen to overlap the joints of the first course, creating a stronger bond, preventing straight vertical cracks from forming. The mortar between courses is thicker, creating a bed for the upper stones to rest on. Each stone is checked for stability before moving to the next. The pattern repeats. Day 3, the third course. Day 4, the fourth. The wall grows upward, inch by inch, circling the interior of the shaft, transforming bare earth into structured stone. It's tedious work, repetitive in a way that makes digging seem varied by comparison. But there's a satisfaction to it too, a craftsmanship that digging lacks. Each stone placed correctly is a small victory. Each completed course is visible progress. They develop tricks as they go. They learn which stones fit together naturally, which shapes work best for corners and curves. They learn to mix the mortar slightly differently depending on temperature, wetter on hot days when it dries too fast, thicker on cool days when it stays workable longer. They learn to clean the faces of the stones before placing them, so the mortar bonds better. They learn to check and double-check levelness, because a wall that tilts even slightly will cause problems higher up. Young Alred proves to have a gift for stonework. His hands seem to know instinctively how stones want to fit together, which way to turn them, how much mortar to use. He works faster than anyone else, but also more carefully, and the courses he lays are noticeably straighter, tighter, better. Others defer to him gradually, letting him choose the stones, following his lead on placement. He doesn't assume authority, it's simply granted to him by the quality of his work. At 20 feet deep, they've laid 3 feet of stone wall. The hole is deeper than before because they had to dig down further to reach solid footing for the stones. But now the upper portion is lined, stable, permanent. Looking down from the surface, you can see the change where Earth's transitions to stone. A visible marker of progress in craft, the work continues. More stones are gathered. More mortars is mixed. More courses are laid, each one adding a few inches to the protective wall that will keep this hole from collapsing. That will ensure this well, if they ever find water, will last not just years, but generations. They work through rain one week, a steady drizzle that turns the worksite into a muddy mess, but can't be allowed to stop progress. The stones become slippery, harder to grip. The mortar has to be protected from too much water, covered with canvas between uses, but they persist. Because stopping means falling behind schedule, though there is no schedule, not really. Just the vague collective understanding that this work should be finished before autumn. Before the days grow short and cold and digging becomes even harder than it already is. At night, some of the men dream of stones. They dream of fitting them together, of perfect walls rising effortlessly, of work that flows without obstacle or error. Then they wake to the reality of sore hands and aching backs, and stones that never quite fit as perfectly as they should. But the dream work and the real work both move toward the same end. A well. Stone-lined and solid, descending into the earth like a prayer made physical. Like hope given form, ... The weather turns contrary in the 5th week. Not dramatically, this isn't a storm season. Isn't the kind of weather that destroys crops or floods homes just persistently uncooperative? 3 days of light rain, just enough to make everything damp without actually washing anything clean. Then 2 days of unexpected heat, sun beating down with late summer intensity, baking the ground hard and making work at the bottom of the hole like being in an oven. Then more rain and sun. Then clouds that threaten rain but deliver only humidity and stillness. The rain is the worst for the work. Water collects at the bottom of the hole, pooling in the uneven floor where stones haven't yet been laid, seeping between the stones where mortar hasn't fully cured. It's not much water, a few inches at most, but it's enough to make digging impossible. To turn the clay into slippery mud that coats everything, to make every foothold treacherous, they try to bail it out. Bucket after bucket hauled up and emptied, the water dark brown with dissolved clay, leaving rusty stains on hands and rope. but water comes from the ground, seeping through the earthen floor, appearing as fast as they can remove it. For a full day they bail, achieving nothing except exhaustion and frustration. "We wait," old Alred finally declares. "Let it drain itself." So they wait. The hole sits with its pool of muddy water at the bottom, inaccessible, temporarily defeating them. They use the time for other things, gathering more stones, repairing tools, checking the upper sections of the stonework for any signs of weakness. But there's a restlessness to the waiting, an impatience. They've become accustomed to daily progress, to the satisfaction of visible change. Waiting feels like failure, even though it's not. Even though it's simply the practical response to conditions beyond their control. When the water finally drains after 2 days of no rain and steady wind that dries, everything they descend to find the bottom of the hole transformed. The clay is cracked, dried into irregular polygons, hard as fired pottery. This is good for stability but terrible for digging. The pickaxe bounces off the surface, barely making a dent. They have to wet the earth deliberately, carrying water down from the creek, moistening it just enough to make it workable again, without turning it back into mud. The heat days bring different problems. At 23 feet deep, the hole is like a chimney in reverse, trapping heat, creating a microclimate of still air and reflected warmth from stone walls. Men descend for their shifts and emerge 30 minutes later, drenched in sweat, dizzy, needing long rests in shade before they can work again. They try working shorter shifts, rotating more frequently. But this slows progress even more. Someone suggests working at night, when the air is cooler, but this is rejected immediately. Working in near darkness is dangerous enough without making it complete darkness. Besides, medieval people are generally diurnal by necessity. Candles and lamp oil are expensive. And there are limits to what can be accomplished when you can't see clearly, so they endure the heat. They drink more water, take more breaks, work more slowly. The creek becomes a constant destination, filling buckets to drink, to pour over heads, to wet cloths that are draped around necks. Children are enlisted to run water up from the creek, earning small favors, a bit of honeycomb. First choice of the day's bread in exchange for their service. During this period, they lose several days to a rope failure. One of the main hauling ropes, worn thin by constant friction against the stone edge at the top of the hole, finally parts under load. The bucket it was holding falls. Thankfully, no one was directly beneath it. Tan shatters at the bottom of the hole. Staves splitting, iron bands bending. The rope has to be replaced, which means a journey to the next village. A day of trading and negotiation. And then the work of splicing the new rope to the old, so they have sufficient length. The bucket is repaired. But it's never quite right afterward. It leaks slightly from cracks that couldn't be fully closed. It becomes the secondary bucket, used only when the better ones are unavailable or need repairs themselves. Nothing is thrown away when damaged things have use, even if diminished. Small injuries accumulate. Thomas cuts his hand on a sharp stone edge, a slice across the palm that bleeds impressively but isn't deep. It's bound with cloth and continues to seep for days, making his grip weak. Simon strains something in his back, a muscle or tendon that protests every morning when he first moves. He continues working, but more carefully, more slowly. And everyone can see the pain in his face, even though he doesn't complain much. Walter's blisters, which had hardened into calluses, split open again after a particularly long shift with the pickaxe. The raw patches weep, clear fluid, and then blood, and his hands stick to the tool handles. The village doesn't have much in the way of medicine, some herb poultices that the wise woman prepares, some prayers, but he wraps his hands in soft cloth and continues working because what else is there to do? The work doesn't stop for small pain. There's a collapse on a Tuesday afternoon in the 6th week, minor but frightening. A section of the earthen wall, about 3 feet square, simply gives way without warning, sliding down into the hole in a rush of loose dirt and small stones. Hugh is at the bottom when it happens, and he shouts and scrambles up the ladder, emerging covered in dust but uninjured. They spend the rest of that day and part of the next clearing the fallen earth and examining the walls for other weak sections. The collapse happens where they haven't yet laid stone. Where the wall is still bare earth, It's a reminder of why stone lining is necessary, why the tedious work of mortar and placement matters. They accelerate the stone laying after that. It's working longer hours on that task, even though it means slower progress on deepening the hole. Safety becomes the priority, at least temporarily. Through all of this, the rain, the heat, the small failures and injuries, the work continues. Not smoothly, not easily, but persistently, stubbornly, with the kind of determination that comes from being too far in to quit. From knowing that the only way out is through. They're 30 feet down now, deeper than anyone in the village has ever been underground. Deep enough that voices from the surface sound distant and strange. Deep enough that the sky above is a small, bright circle, like a single eye watching, and still no water. The earth they're digging through is damp sometimes, dry other times, but never truly wet. No springs reveal themselves. No underground stream announces its presence. Just earth, layer after layer, yielding slowly to their tools, giving up its secrets one bucket load at a time. Patient, as only geology can be patient, waiting with them for the moment if it comes. When it comes, that water finally appears ... at 35 feet deep. Sound becomes its own kind of presence. Not just background noise, but something you notice, something you think about, something that marks the strangeness of being this far underground. While still being able to see daylight, your own breathing sounds loud when you're at the bottom. Each inhale and exhale seems amplified, bouncing off stone walls that have become smooth with moisture and lime. Turning to your ears slightly changed, slightly hollow, you become aware of your breath in a way you never are on the surface. Where air moves freely and breathing is just something that happens without thought. The scrape of the spade, that familiar sound that's been the soundtrack of this project. Since the beginning, sounds different here, too. Sharper, more metallic. The stone walls catch the sound and throw it back, creating a brief echo that folds back on itself before fading. Scrape, scrape, the spade cuts the earth, and the sound bounces up the shaft and disappears into the bright circle overhead. When the pickaxe strikes stone, which happens more frequently now. As they work through layers that are more rock than earth, the sound is almost painful. A sharp crack that ricochets around the confined space, making ears ring, making you flinch even though you're the one who swung the tool. It's the kind of sound that carries all the way to the surface, announcing work from the depths, the persistent knock of human effort against geological time. Voices change too. When someone speaks from the bottom of the hole, their words float upward, hollowed out, echoing slightly. Simple instructions, bucket coming up, or send down the chisel, acquire an oddly formal quality, like pronouncements rather than casual speech. And voices from above, from the surface, sound thin and distant, as if they're coming from another world entirely. Which, in a sense, they are. Water makes its own sounds, and they're starting to hear them now, even though no significant water has been found. Drips, small trickles, where moisture seeps through the stone lining. Finding channels in the mortar joints, making quiet plinking sounds as drops fall to the floor. At first, these sounds were alarming. Does water mean they've gone deep enough? Or does it mean the walls are failing, letting in moisture that will undermine everything? But old Alred explains that seepage is normal, expected. Even goodette means they're getting close to the water table. Close to the depths where earth is always wet, there's a sound that's hard to describe. A kind of hollow breathing that the hole itself seems to make. Air moves through the shaft slowly, pulled by temperature differences between surface and depth. Spirit, and this movement creates a whisper, barely audible but constant. It's like being inside the chest of some enormous sleeping creature, feeling its respiration, rising and falling with rhythms you can't quite predict. Sometimes sounds come from the earth itself. Small creaks and groans as stone settles, as pressure redistributes. As the hole continues to modify the landscape around it in ways invisible but real, these sounds are unsettling at first. Is something collapsing? Is danger coming? But gradually they become familiar. It's just another part of the acoustic landscape of deep places. The rope creaks when it's under load. Fibers stretching and relaxing, wooden pulleys at the top squeaking slightly on their axles. This is a rhythmic sound, matched to the raising and lowering of buckets, as regular as a heartbeat. Creak, creak, the rope complains, but it holds. It always holds. The sound becomes almost comforting after a while, a sign that the system is working. That connection between surface and depth remains intact. Walter notices that he can hear the church bell from the bottom of the hole, even though it's faint and distorted. The bell rings for noon prayers, for evening vespers, marking the hours in a way that's useful when you're underground, where sun position is irrelevant. The sound comes down, the shaft changed, flattened, but recognizable. It's a reminder that the surface world continues. That life goes on up there, even while down here time seems to exist differently. At 40 feet reached in the 8th week, there's a quality of silence at the bottom. It's unlike any silence on the surface. It's not truly quiet. There are always the small sounds of work. Breathing, water dripping, but there's an absence of the wind. Bird song, distant animal sounds, all the acoustic texture that fills outdoor air. The silence is thicker here, more present, almost tangible. When work pauses and everyone is still, even for a moment, the silence presses in like a physical thing. Some men like this silence. They find it peaceful, meditative, a rare escape from the constant low-level noise of village life. They'll pause in their work sometimes, just standing, listening to nothing, feeling the coolness and the darkness and the weight of earth on all sides. It's like being inside a secret. It's like knowing something the surface world doesn't know. Others find the silence oppressive, uncomfortable, too much like burial. These men work faster, talk more, fill the space with sound to avoid the emptiness that would otherwise dominate. They hum while working, mutter to themselves, call up to the surface more than necessary. Needing the reassurance of human voice in the deep places, the echo in the hole changes as it gets deeper. In the early days, when the hole was shallow, there was barely any echo at all. Now, at 40 feet, a shout from the bottom can reverberate for a second or more, bouncing between stone walls, taking its time to fade. Children discover this and start calling down into the hole, delighted by the echo, by the way their voices come back to them transformed. The workers pretend to be annoyed but are secretly amused, remembering what it was like to find magic in ordinary things. There's a sound that comes just before dusk. When the angle of light changes and the temperature begins to drop, a settling sound, soft and pervasive, as if the earth is relaxing after the day's disturbance. It's not dramatic, you'd miss it if you weren't listening, but it's there. A susurrus of tiny adjustments, soil compacting, moisture redistributing, the whole finding its temporary equilibrium before tomorrow's work begins again. And underneath everything, underneath all the human sounds and tool sounds and water sounds, there's something else. A depth sound. A presence. It's the sound of being far from the surface, far from light. In a place where Earth has weight and history and patience measured in millennia. It's the sound of descending into the planet's hidden places, into spaces that existed before humans and will exist after. Spaces that tolerate human presence but don't particularly care about it. This sound, or is it silence, is what Hugh says he'll remember most. Not the work, not the exhaustion, but the strange acoustic quality of being deep underground, of hearing the world through 40 feet of earth and stone, of being suspended between surface and depths, neither fully in one place nor the other. Existing in the liminal space where ordinary life transforms into something older, darker, more fundamental. If sound is one dimension of depth, smell is another. At 42 feet below the surface, where the air is cool and slightly damp, and the light from above feels more like memory than reality, the smell of the well is distinctly its own, unlike anything on the surface. A unique combination of elements that exists nowhere else. The dominant smell is stone. Not warm sun-baked stone, not the dusty stone of ancient walls, but wet stone. Stone that's lived in darkness. Stone that seeps moisture and grows things the surface never sees. It's a mineral smell, clean but not fresh, sharp but not unpleasant. It smells of calcium and clay, of iron deposits that leave rust stains on the limestone, of the chemical processes that happen slowly over geological time, when water and rock negotiate their endless interaction. Mixed with the stone smell is the smell of lime mortar, which is sharper, more caustic, alkaline in a way that makes your nose prickle slightly. The mortar is everywhere now, between every stone, coating the walls where it's squeezed out from joints, on hands and tools and clothes. Its smell is persistent, impossible to escape when you're in the hole, clinging to you when you emerge so that people can identify well workers by scent alone. There's the smell of earth, though different from surface earth. Surface soil smells of life-decomposing plant matter. It's the activity of bacteria and fungi, the sharp green smell of growing things. But the earth down here is older, deeper, removed from the active layer where life concentrates its energies. This earth smells of time, of compression, of slow transformation from one thing to another over centuries of burial and pressure. Water adds its own notes to the olfactory composition. Not much water yet, just seepage and dampness, but enough to smell. Well water has a different scent than creek water cleaner. Mineral rich, with none of the organic complexity that comes from flowing through forests and fields where things live and die and decay. The water smell down here is pure in a way that surface water never is. Filtered through dozens of feet of earth and stone, stripped of everything except essential water-ness. When the candle burns, which it does more often now. Because the deeper they go, the dimmer the natural light becomes, it adds a wax smell. Slightly sweet, mixed with the smoke that rises slowly through the shaft. The smoke behaves strangely in the still air, rising in a nearly perfect column. Taking its time, creating temporary layers and swirls. The smell of burning lingers longer than it would on the surface, has nowhere to dissipate to. Just hangs there until new air somehow replaces it. Human smells are present too, though polite medieval culture doesn't acknowledge them directly. Sweat. Certainly the work is exhausting, and the air is close. Breath. The smell of unwashed bodies, because washing is infrequent, and labor doesn't pause for hygiene. These smells aren't necessarily unpleasant, they're just human. Ordinary. The normal odors of people doing hard physical work. They mix with all the other smells, becoming part of the whole's unique atmosphere. There's a fungal smell sometimes, musty and organic. From moss or lichen that's begun growing on the damp stone walls where the tiniest amount of light penetrates. It's not strong, just a hint of growth, life asserting itself even here. Finding the minimal conditions it needs and making the most of them. Young Alred, descending one morning, notices that the smell is stronger near certain sections of wall and realizes that these are the places where seepage is greatest, where moisture feeds the invisible organisms that create that distinctive, earthy fungal odor. The smell changes with the seasons, though they're underground and theoretically isolated from seasonal variation, but they notice that in the warmer weeks, the whole smells slightly different, earthier, more active somehow, as if the warmth penetrates even here and accelerates the slow chemical processes happening in the dark. In cooler periods, the smell becomes sharper, cleaner, the coldness seeming to preserve or intensify the mineral notes while suppressing the organic ones when it rains on the surface. The smell at the bottom changes noticeably. New water percolates down, bringing with it traces of whatever it passed through: grass, soil, tree roots. For a few hours after rain, there's a freshness in the hole, a greenness that gradually fades as the water seeps away or becomes absorbed into the stone. It's a reminder of connection that despite being 40+ feet underground, they're not entirely separated from the surface world. Thomas claims he can smell when they're getting close to the water table. He says there's a particular wetness to the air, a saturation that smells different from mere dampness. Others are skeptical. How can you smell what hasn't arrived yet? But Thomas insists, as it's like how you can smell rain before it starts. It's like the air itself carries information about what's coming. Whether he's right or just imagining patterns and chaos, no one can say for certain. The smell is strongest in the morning, before the day's work begins disturbing everything. If you descend first thing, before anyone else, When the hole has been quiet all night, you can smell it most purely. Stone and water and earth and time, mixed together in proportions found nowhere else, unchanged by human activity, just existing as it is. Some men take comfort in the smell. It becomes familiar, reassuring, a confirmation that they're in the right place, doing the right work. When Hugh emerges from a long shift at the bottom and someone asks how it is down there, he sometimes just says, "Smells like a well," and everyone nods because they understand what he means. Even though none of them has ever smelled a completed well, and so they're really just accepting that this smell, whatever it is what a well is supposed to smell like. Others find the smell claustrophobic, too enclosed, too much like being inside the earth, rather than just digging through it. They emerge grateful for the smell of open air, of wind and sun, and the 10,000 odors that mix together to create the scent of the surface world. They'll stand breathing deeply, deliberately, flushing the well smell from their lungs, recalibrating to the normal world before their next descent. At night, lying in their homes, some of the workers can still smell it or think they can, or remember it so vividly that memory becomes sensation. The stone smell, the lime smell, the deep earth smell that seems to have permeated their skin and clothes, and perhaps their souls. It follows them into sleep, into dreams where they're still digging, still descending, still surrounded by the particular aromatic signature of deep places, and the smell is what will remain. Years from now, decades from now, when the well is finished and in daily use, long after the effort is forgotten, long after the specific difficulties and small triumphs fade from memory, someone will lean over the well's edge to draw water and catch that smell rising from the depth school stone and mineral water and darkness, and they'll know, without being able to articulate how they know, that this is a real well, a deep well, a well that reaches down to where the earth keeps its oldest secrets, at 45 feet. They pause to consider where they are and where they're going. Not officially, there's no meeting, no formal discussion, but in the way people do when momentum slows and perspective becomes possible. They've been digging for 9 weeks now, since early June, and it's nearly mid-August. Summer is aging, and with it, the urgency to finish before weather turns. Osmond makes marks on a piece of tanned hide. Not writing exactly, he can't write in the formal sense, but symbols that represent days and depth and progress. He's developed a system. 1 mark for each day worked, clusters of 5 grouped together for easy counting. Beside these marks are knots on his measuring rope, 1 for every 3 feet of depth. It's crude record-keeping, but it's record-keeping nonetheless. A way of tracking the work that feels important even though no one quite knows why. The priest, who can actually write, has been keeping his own record in the church's small collection of documents. A single parchment carefully kept, noting the commencement of the well, significant milestones, and the names of the workers. His handwriting is formal, Latin, mixed with vernacular terms. The well work continues. Today, the 45th foot was reached. The men persist, though the labor is arduous. Stone lining proceeds. Water not yet found. God willing, by harvest time. These records seem unnecessary in the moment. Everyone knows what's happening. Everyone can see the hole getting deeper. But both Osmond and the priest understand something about time and memory. What's obvious today becomes uncertain tomorrow. What's remembered clearly this year becomes confused in 10 years, forgotten in 50. The marks in writing are anchors. Small resistances against the tide of forgetting that eventually drowns everything. The village elder, a man named Geoffrey, who's older even than Alred and speaks so slowly that conversations with him require patience, asks whether the well is worth the effort. Not as criticism, just as genuine question. They've been working for 2 months. The hole is 45 feet deep. They've moved tons of earth, laid hundreds of stones, consumed countless hours that could have been spent on other things. And there's still no water, no guarantee that water will come. No certainty that this entire enterprise isn't just elaborate pointlessness. We'll know when we're done, Osmond says, which isn't really an answer but is the only answer available. They're past the point of abandonment. The hole is too deep. Too much work is invested. Too much communal energy has been poured into this project to simply fill it back in and pretend it never happened. They are committed now in the way that only medieval people understand commitment. Not as enthusiasm, but as acceptance. Not as choice, but as obligation to the work that's been started and must somehow be finished. The work has changed the village in small ways. The dirt pile has grown so large, it's become a feature of the landscape, a small hill where there was no hill before. Children play on it, climbing to the top and sliding down the sides, making games out of geography. The stone pile, though diminishing as stones are used, still occupies significant space, and paths have been rerouted around it. The well hole itself has become central. Literally and figuratively, people navigate by it. Meet near it, use it as reference point by the well hole. Near the baker's hut, on the path to the church. The workers themselves have changed. They're thinner, harder, their bodies reshaped by the demands of constant labor. Hands that were soft have become calloused. Backs that ached in the early days have strengthened or broken. Some men can work longer shifts than before, as others nurse persistent pains that may never fully heal. There's a quiet pride in this transformation. An unspoken understanding that they've become well diggers. That this work has marked them in ways that will last beyond the project. Walter has grown more serious. At 16, he started this work still partly a boy, playful and easily distracted. Now, 9 weeks later, is recognizably becoming a man, not because of any single event, but through the accumulated weight of daily responsibility. The requirement to be reliable, the knowledge that others depend on his effort. He still jokes sometimes. Still has moments of lightness, but they're rarer now. Tempered by the awareness that work this deep is also work this serious. Godwin. The quiet ox-strong man has become the unofficial safety monitor. He's the one who checks the rope before each use, who examines the walls for signs of instability, who insists on caution when others want to rush. He doesn't speak much more than he ever did, but when he does speak, stop. Check the wall there, where that rope is fraying. Everyone listens. His silence has acquired authority. Hugh's back, which has troubled him since the beginning, has actually improved. The constant work has either strengthened the weak points or taught him how to move in ways that avoid the worst pain. He claims it's a miracle, jokingly attributes it to the priest's blessings. But really, it's just adaptation. It's a body learning to do what's required of it because there's no alternative. The younger men seamen. Young Alred, Matthew Hove, formed a bond that will likely last the rest of their lives. They work together naturally now, anticipating each other's movements, coordinating without needing to discuss. Years from now, they'll remember these summer weeks. We'll tell stories about the difficult days and small triumphs. We'll maintain a connection based on shared effort that transcends normal friendship. At midday on the day they reach 45 feet, the priest comes to the well hole and conducts a brief prayer. Not a special ceremony, just routine blessing, asking for continued safety and eventual success. Everyone pauses in their work, stands with heads bowed, and when the priest finishes, they resume without comment. It's a small moment, barely noteworthy, but it reinforces the sense that this work has significance beyond the practical. That digging a well is also somehow spiritual labor. An act of faith that water exists and can be reached if they persist long enough. That evening, sitting with the other men after work, Osmond looks at his marked hide and does rough calculations. They're averaging about half a foot per day, now slower than the early days when the digging was easier, but steady. If they maintain this pace, if nothing major goes wrong, they might reach 60 feet by late September. Is that deep enough? Will water appear by then? No one knows. Wells in other places range from 30 feet to over 100. They can only dig and hope and trust that the dowsing rod's twitch meant something. That the spot chosen is the right spot. That beneath them, somewhere in the darkness they're excavating toward, water waits patiently for discovery. How deep do you think? Walter asks, and the question hangs in the evening air, unanswerable but important. Deep enough, old Alred says from his seat by the fire. Deep enough when we find it, not before. It's the kind of non-answer that annoyed Walter when this work began. but now he understands it, accepts it, even appreciates it. Some questions don't have answers until the work itself provides them. You dig until you reach water. That's the only measure that matters. That's the only certainty in an uncertain enterprise. They return to their homes as darkness falls, to sleep in meals and the brief respite before tomorrow's work begins again. The well hole sits open under the stars. 45 feet of carefully excavated absence. A vertical corridor between surface and depths, between present and possible future, between the world as it is and the world as it might become if water, miraculous and ordinary, finally appears. ... The bucket has become the most important tool. Not the most dramatic that honor belongs to the pickaxe. Not the most skilled the trowel for mortar laying requires more finesse. But the most essential, the most constantly used, the one object that everything depends on, the bucket. By the 10th week. The primary bucket, the largest and sturdiest one, the one they rely on most, has made approximately 4,000 trips. Down, empty, up full. Down, empty, up full. Each trip is perhaps 90 feet of travel, 45 down, 45 up. Meaning this single bucket has traveled roughly 70 miles while covering a physical distance of less than 100 feet. It's a strange mathematics, the kind that reveals how much effort is hidden in simple actions. The bucket shows its use. The wood is dark with moisture and earth staining, original pale color of new oak, invisible now beneath accumulated grime. The iron bands have developed a patina of rust mixed with polish, rough where they've been battered against stone walls, smooth where hands have gripped them thousands of times. The rope handle is worn thin at the attachment points, constantly monitored for fraying, periodically replaced before failure can occur. There's a rhythm to the bucket that everyone who works the well knows without thinking. The particular sound it makes settling at the bottom of the hole, the slight resistance when it's being filled, the change in weight as you begin to haul it upward, the way the rope stretches slightly under load, the final appearance at the top, dripping and heavy, containing the earth's resistance made portable and manageable. Hauling is work in itself. At 48 feet deep reached in the middle of the 10th week, each bucket requires significant effort to raise. The person at the top pulls hand over hand on the rope, arms burning, the pulley creaking its constant complaint. The bucket slowly ascending through the shaft. 30 pulls, 40 pulls, each one moving the bucket a foot or two higher, each one requiring sustained effort, until finally the bucket emerges into sunlight and waiting hands. They sing sometimes while hauling. Not elaborate songs, but simple rhythmic chants that coordinate effort and pastime. Haul away. Haul away, up from the earth it comes. Haul away, water. We'll find some. The words are meaningless. Improvised, changing daily, but the rhythm is constant. Matching the pull of raising weight against gravity, the bucket hauler becomes a specialized role. Not everyone can do it well. It requires not just strength, but timing, rhythm, the ability to maintain steady effort over hours. Thomas is particularly good at it. He's not the strongest man, but he has endurance, can haul buckets all morning without tiring, obviously. He settles into a meditative state while hauling, his mind going somewhere else while his body performs the repetitive motion. And when his shift ends, he sometimes seems surprised that hours have passed. The bucket filler. The bottom develops their own rhythm. Spade the loose earth into the bucket, judge when it's full without overfilling, too full, and it spills on the way up. Wasting effort, call out ready, wait for the bucket to begin rising, resume digging while waiting for the empty bucket to return. On a good day, there's no wasted motion, no pause. The system flows like a slow machine made of humans and tools and shared intention. But buckets fail. They've lost two to breakage, one dropped from the top, one that struck a stone projection too hard and split. Each failure means hours of delay while repairs are made or replacements found. Buckets are precious now, treated with care bordering on reverence. Before each shift, the working bucket is inspected. Staves checked for cracks, bands checked for tightness, handle checked for stability. Prevention is everything. They've learned to read the bucket's weight, to know by feel how full it is and what it contains. Earth has a certain weight, slightly different depending on clay versus silt versus sand. Stones are heavier, unmistakable when several are in the bucket together. The rare bucket that's mostly water when they're cleaning seepage from the bottom, its heaviest of all water weighs more than earth, more than stone, and a full bucket of water requires 2 people to haul. The bucket marks time. 20 buckets this morning, someone will say, and everyone understands that as both volume and duration. 20 buckets means roughly 2 hours of work, means maybe 4 inches of additional depth, means steady progress. Bad day? Only 12 buckets means delays, difficulties, the work fighting back at 50 feet deep. They add a second pulley, creating a mechanical advantage that makes hauling easier. The system is simple. The rope now passes through 2 wheels instead of 1, effectively having the force required to raise the bucket. The trade-off is that twice as much rope must be pulled, but that's acceptable, easier to manage than the raw weight. The addition of the second pulley is celebrated quietly. It's a small engineering improvement that makes everyone's work noticeably easier. The bucket becomes personified in small ways. She's full, someone will say, or easy with her. She's riding the wall. Or good bucket today. Working smooth, it's not quite belief that the bucket is alive. Just the natural human tendency to see personality in tools that are used constantly, that become extensions of intention and effort. Children ask to haul buckets sometimes, wanting to participate, wanting to feel connected to the work. They're usually allowed 1 or 2 pulls, carefully supervised, and they strain mightily against weight that's barely manageable for them. When the bucket reaches the top, they're breathless and proud, having contributed, having done real work. Most will remember these moments decades later, will tell grandchildren about the summer they helped dig the village well, though their actual contribution was minimal. The endless bucket. Up and down, down and up, day after day, week after week. Each trip is the same, mechanically, physically, but each trip is also unique, different earth, different stones. It's a different moment in the gradual transformation of absence into structure. The bucket sees everything, touches everything, is the literal connection between surface and depths, between the world of light and the world of darkness where water might be waiting. By the end of the 10th week, the workers no longer think consciously about the bucket. It's just there, always there, as essential as breathing, as constant as the pulse. The creak of rope, the splash of dirt, the rhythmic hauling that marks the hours. These sounds are the heartbeat of the work, the proof that progress continues, that the earth yields slowly but certainly. To the patient persistence of the endless bucket asterisk, I'll continue with the final chapters to complete the full 15,000-word script. Would you like me to proceed with chapters 13 to 18? Asterisk, the buckets break the rhythm most often. One splits a stave in the first week, probably because it was already weak and the extra stress was too much. They repair it with cloth and pine tar. It's a messy temporary solution that holds but makes the bucket smell strange and leak slightly. Another bucket loses its handle when the iron loop pulls out of the wood. The blacksmith has to come, heat the metal, and reattach it, driving rivets through the stave to distribute the load. Better. These small failures and repairs become part of the story of the well, part of the accumulated experience that makes the work real. Nothing goes perfectly. Nothing is ideal. But everything continues, adapted and adjusted. Problem solved in the moment with whatever materials and knowledge are available. Walter, the young strong one, develops a particular affection for the oldest spade. Osmond's inherited one. He likes the way it balances, the way its handle fits his grip, the sense that he's participating in something that stretches backward in time. When he uses that spade, he sometimes imagines Osmond's father using it, and that father's father, all the way back to whoever first commissioned it from whatever smith's forge. An unbroken line of hands and work and earth moving, and now his hands are part of that line. The pickaxe, conversely, no one likes. It's necessary but cruel, punishing to use, making shoulders ache and palms blister. They take turns with it, no one using it for more than 20 minutes at a stretch. The youngest and strongest men use it most because they can, because age and authority grant them the privilege of suffering more. There's a kind of pride in wielding the pickaxe well, in making it bite deep into resistant earth, in being the one who breaks through when everyone else's tools are bouncing off some unseen obstacle by the end of the second week. The tools have become so familiar that no one thinks about them anymore. They're just extensions of intention, ways of translating will into work as natural as using hands. The scrape of spade on stone, the thunk of pickaxe on clay, the creak of rope and splash of dirt into buckets, these sounds become the soundtrack of summer. As characteristic of this season as birds or thunder or the wind through wheat, and slowly, shovelful by shovelful, bucket by bucket, the hole grows deeper. The earth gives way, and the tools, faithful and patient, continue their work, wearing down so slowly that no one notices, lasting just long enough, hopefully, to finish what they've started. You might imagine that medieval construction was a relentless march of progressed stone upon stone. Hour upon hour, the steady drumbeat of labor echoing through the valley. But that would be to misunderstand the rhythm of life in the 13th century. Because between every stroke of the pick, between every bucket hauled to the surface, there existed something else entirely. The pause, the breath, the moment when hands stilled and bellies demanded attention. And it is in these pauses, these unremarkable intervals of rest, we find the true texture of medieval life. The sun has climbed to its midpoint in the sky. You can feel its warmth even through the cool spring air, that peculiar heat that doesn't quite reach into the bones but sits on the skin like a gentle hand. The workers who have been at their labor since first light begin to slow. Not all at once. Never all at once. That would suggest coordination, planning, some kind of formal signal. But no one man simply stops. He straightens his back with a sound that might be relief or might be pain. He sets down his shovel. He walks toward the edge of the clearing. Others notice. They too begin to ease their pace. A bucket is set down rather than hauled up. A rope is coiled rather than pulled. And within the span of perhaps 10 minutes, the entire worksite has transformed from a place of activity into a place of waiting. This is the midday break. The pause for bread and ale. Someone has brought the food in a woven basket, its handle worn smooth by years of use. Probably it was one of the women from the village, though which woman, and whether she is mother, wife, sister, or daughter to any of these men, the records do not say. Medieval life did not concern itself with such details. The basket is simply there, as it is there every day, and that is enough. Inside, bread. Dark bread, dense and chewy, made from rye and barley, with perhaps a handful of wheat if the harvest was kind. This is not the soft white bread of lords and abbots. This is the bread of labor, the bread that sits heavy in the stomach and provides the fuel for another 4 hours of digging. Each loaf has been scored with a simple cross knot for religious reasons, though that meaning is certainly present. But because the mark allows, it's the bread to expand evenly in the oven. Practical, functional, unromantic. The men gather in loose clusters, not quite a circle, not quite a line. They sit on stones, on upturned buckets, on the ground itself, if the earth is dry enough. They do not rush toward the food. There is no scrambling, no competition. Each man knows his portion. Each man has done this 1,000 times before. One of the older workers, a man whose name might have been William or Walter or any of the other half-dozen names that appeared with numbing frequency in medieval England, tears off a piece of bread and chews slowly. His jaw works with the methodical patience of someone who has learned that rushing brings only indigestion. He takes a drink from the shared flask ale, lukewarm and slightly sour, but wet and alcoholic enough to be safer than water. Ale, the great medieval beverage. Not the strong, hoppy beer of later centuries, but a mild, murky drink that children and adults alike consumed throughout the day. It was brewed weekly by the village women, a task as routine as washing or spinning. The ale at this construction site has probably been fermenting for 3 or 4 days. Just long enough to develop a gentle buzz, not long enough to become properly intoxicating. though by the end of a long day of sharing the flask, more than one man will walk home with a pleasant looseness in his limbs. The conversation, when it comes, is sporadic. Medieval workers did not engage in the constant chatter of modern laborers. Silence was not uncomfortable. Silence was simply the default state, interrupted occasionally by observation or complaint. "Rain coming," someone says, squinting at the sky. Another man grunts. Agreement or dismissal? It's impossible to say. "Saw a fox near the miller's field yesterday. This passes for conversation. No one asks follow-up questions. No one demands elaboration. The information is simply released into the air where it settles among the group, like dust motes in sunlight. Perhaps tomorrow someone will mention seeing the same fox. Perhaps no one will speak of it again. Both outcomes are equally acceptable, but sometimes not every day. But often enough, the silence breaks open into something more. Gossip, that most human of currencies. That social glue that binds communities together across centuries and continents. "Heard Thomas's daughter is to marry," one of the younger workers says, his mouth still half full of bread. This gets attention. Several heads turn. Which daughter? The tall one. Dark hair? Marrying who? Baker's son from the next village. There is a pause while this information is considered turned over, examined for significance. "Good match," someone concludes. "Could be worse." Another agrees, and that essentially is the end of it. No one asks about dowries or arrangements, about whether the girl is happy or whether the baker's son is kind. Those questions belong to a different century, a different sensibility. Here, a marriage is assessed on practical grounds. Will it strengthen family ties? Will it improve economic standing? Will it cause problems or solve them? The tall, dark-haired daughter of Thomas, whose own surname is lost to time, as making a sensible match. The community approves. Life continues. More bread is consumed. More ale is drunk. The sun continues its slow arc across the sky, different to the small dramas unfolding below. One of the men has brought an onion from his garden. He slices it with a knife that has been sharpened so many times the blade is barely wider than a finger. He eats the onion raw, layer by layer, tears streaming down his weathered face. No one comments. Raw onions are a common addition to the medieval workers' meal, sharp, pungent, and rumored to prevent illness. Whether they actually do is a question for herbalists and monks. Here, at the well site, they are simply eaten because they are available, because they grow easily, because habit and tradition say they should be consumed. The conversation meanders, as all such conversations do. Someone mentions that the Lord Steward passed through the village 2 days ago, collecting rents. This prompts a general air of dissatisfaction, though nothing is pointed as actual complaint. Complaining about taxes and rents is dangerous. Complaining about the weather, however, is both safe and socially expected. To dry this spring, it's not enough rain in April. Wells need digging everywhere, not just here. This last comment prompts a few rueful chuckles. It is funny, in a grim way, that they are spending months digging this hole in the ground specifically because water is scarce. And yet, even with this well, even with others being dug in neighboring villages, the fundamental problem remains. The world does not provide enough water, easily enough. Every drop must be coaxed from the earth, hauled in buckets, rationed carefully. It is the central challenge of medieval rural life, as constant and inescapable as hunger or cold. But there is no point dwelling on it. The workers have learned the hard lesson of their era. Some problems cannot be solved, only endured. And so they eat their bread and drink their ale and rest their aching muscles. And they do not waste energy on resentment. One of the men lies back on the ground, his hands folded behind his head, staring up at the sky. He watches clouds drift by, those same timeless clouds that human beings have watched since the dawn of consciousness. Perhaps he sees shapes in them, a horse, a dragon, the face of a saint. Or perhaps he sees nothing but whiteness and blue. Medieval people were not required to narrate their inner lives for the benefit of future historians. The break lasts perhaps half an hour, perhaps a bit longer. There is no clock, no bell to mark its end. The workers simply know in the way that people attuned to the rhythms of sun and season know when it is time to return to labor. One by one, they rise. They brush crumbs from their tunics. They take final swigs from the ale flask. They stretch, they spit, they scratch, they groan. And then, without ceremony, they return to the well. The basket, now empty except for a few crusts, is left at the edge of the clearing. Someone will retrieve it later, take it back to the village, and tomorrow it will return full again. This is the cycle. This is the rhythm. Bread and ale, work and rest, day after day after day, until the well is finished, or until they are too old to dig, or until they die. And in the ordinariness of this moment, the chewing and the swallowing and the brief, mundane conversation, there exists a kind of peace. Not the peace of accomplishment or the peace of rest, but the peace of repetition. The peace of knowing exactly what comes next because it is exactly what has always come. For the modern mind, addicted to novelty and stimulation, this might seem unbearable. But for the medieval worker, it is simply life. The well waits. The earth waits. And slowly, so slowly, the hole grows deeper. You would think it would be dramatic. You would think that after months of back-breaking labor, after endless days of hauling stone and earth from an ever-deepening shaft, after bruised hands and aching backs, and the creeping fear that perhaps there is no water to be found, you would think that the moment water finally appears would be marked by celebration, shouting, relief so profound it moves men to tears. But that is not what happened, because this is not a story of drama. This is a story of medieval construction, where even the pivotal moments arrive with the same, its understated patience as everything else. It was late summer when the water came. The exact date is unrecorded, because medieval villagers did not mark such occasions with the precision we now take for granted. It was sometime after the Feast of the Assumption, perhaps, or maybe during the week of St. Bartholomew. The harvest was beginning in the fields, that annual race against weather and rot that consumed every available hand. But the well workers were excused from the harvest as they had been all season because the well was important. Not urgent, but important. The diggers had reached a depth of perhaps 30 feet, possibly more. Measuring was imprecise, accomplished by counting rope lengths rather than consulting standardized units. But 30 feet is deep enough that the men at the bottom worked in near constant gloom. The sunlight reaching them only at midday, and only as a pale suggestion of illumination. They had long since learned to work by feel as much as by sight. On this particular day, unremarkable in every way except for what happened. The youngest of the diggers was at the bottom of the shaft. His name was John, or perhaps Edmund. The records offer both names at different points, and it's entirely possible they refer to different people, or that the same person was known by both names depending on who was speaking. Medieval identity was fluid in ways we find uncomfortable. John O'Redmond was swinging his pick into the damp clay that lined the bottom of the well. The clay had been getting steadily wetter for days now, a promising sign that water was near. But near, in geological terms, is a frustratingly vague concept. Near could mean inches. Near could mean feet. Near could mean you are wrong entirely, and this is merely residual moisture from winter rains. And you will need to dig another 10 feet before finding anything useful. The pick struck stone. This was not unusual. The shaft was lined with stone, and occasionally a piece would work loose and fall to the bottom. Jonah Redmond bent down, feeling in the dim light for whatever had made the solid clinking sound. His fingers found not a loose stone, but bedrock, or something very much like it. A solid layer that had not been there yesterday. He called up to the surface, his voice echoing in the shaft. "Stone here," from above, a voice called back. "Break through it." This is not dramatic advice. This is simply the next step in the process. If you encounter stone, you break through it if you can, or you widen the shaft to go around it if you cannot. The workers had done this a dozen times already. John Redmond adjusted his grip on the pick. He swung again, harder this time, aiming for what felt like a seam or weakness in the stone. The pick connected with a sharp crack that resonated up the shaft. And then seepage, not a gush, not a fountain, not even a trickle really. Just a gentle darkening of the clay around the point of impact. a dampness that was more than dampness. A witness that suggested something below was slowly, patiently beginning to emerge. John Ardman crouched down, pressing his hand to the spot. His fingers came away wet. Not muddy. Wet. There was a difference, subtle but unmistakable. This was not surface moisture. This was water from below. Water, he called up the shaft. His voice was not excited. It was simply informative. From above, movement. Footsteps approaching the edge of the well. Faces appearing at the rim, dark silhouettes against the bright sky. You certain? The confirmation was enough. The workers knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Water that seeps is not the same as water that collects. You need the latter to have a functional well. But seepage was a start. It was progress. It was the first tangible proof that they had not spent months digging an expensive, elaborate hole to nowhere. John Redmond was hauled to the surface. The bucket, normally used for hauling earth, was lowered empty and then drawn back up. At the bottom, a thin layer of water had collected, perhaps the depth of a thumb, no more. It was murky with clay and grit, more brown than clear, and it smelled of earth and minerals. No one suggested drinking it. The workers gathered around the bucket, staring at its contents with the focused attention usually reserved for religious relics. This was not quite water yet, but it was the promise of water. It was potential. Could be it settles, one of the older workers said, his tone carefully neutral. Could be it dries up. Could be another agreed this too was true. Seepage did not guarantee a reliable water source. Springs could appear and disappear based on rainfall, based on seasonal underground flows, based on factors that medieval people could observe but not fully understand. The earth held its secrets close, but the work did not stop. If anything, the pace increased slightly, not dramatically, never dramatically, but with a renewed sense that perhaps this endeavor would not be entirely futile. The diggers returned to the shaft. They continued to remove earth and stone, but now they did so with the knowledge that each bucket might bring water closer to the surface. Each strike of the pick might widen the channel through which the spring was flowing. Days passed. The seepage increased, slowly, incrementally. By the end of the first week, the bottom of the well held water to the depth of a hand. It was still murky, still mixed with sediment, but it was undeniably water. By the end of the second week, the depth had increased to perhaps 6 inches. The diggers now worked standing in the water, their boots such as they were squelching with each step. There was still no celebration, because the test of a well is not whether water appears, but whether it continues to appear. A well that fills once and then runs dry is worse than no well at all. It is a monument to wasted effort. And so the workers watched and waited, drawing water daily to see if it would replenish itself overnight. It did, slowly, grudgingly, but reliably. Each morning, the water level had returned to roughly where it had been the previous afternoon. This was the crucial sign. This meant the spring was not a fluke, not a one-time event, but a genuine source. Small, yes. Modest, certainly. But real and still, no one celebrated. Because medieval villagers understood something that modern people often forget. Beginnings are easy. It is the continuation that matters. A well that provides water today might fail tomorrow. A spring that flows in September might vanish by March. The true test would come over months, over years, over the slow accumulation of seasons. Only time would determine whether this well was worth the effort that had been poured into it. But on that quiet afternoon, when John O'Redmond's pick broke through the clay and the first seepage began, something shifted. The workers did not cheer, but they nodded. They allowed themselves the smallest of satisfactions. They returned to their homes that evening with the knowledge that progress, real and measurable progress, had been made. The well had water, not much, not yet, but water nonetheless. And perhaps, just perhaps, the work might actually be finished someday. The water had come. That much was settled. The well, that patient excavation that had consumed the better part of a year, had finally fulfilled its primary purpose. But water at the bottom of a 30-foot shaft is not particularly useful if there is no reliable way to retrieve it. And so, even as the spring continued, its slow, steady seepage, attention turned to the mechanics of extraction. This is where the well begins to look like what we recognize as structure, not merely a hole. This is where the ingenuity of medieval engineering, modest though it was, revealed itself. First, the stone rim. You might pass by a medieval well today assuming you can find one. Assuming it has survived the centuries and not think twice about the smooth stone collar that surrounds its opening. It seems natural, inevitable, as though wells simply arrive in the world this way. But every element of a well's construction is deliberate. It's a result of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of builders. The rim serves multiple purposes. It prevents erosion. Without it, the edges of the well would crumble gradually, dirt and debris falling into the water below. It provides a stable surface for the winch mechanism. And perhaps most importantly, it protects. Children stumble. Animals wander. Drunk villagers lose their footing in the dark. A well without a proper rim is a hazard, a hidden mouth waiting to swallow the unwary. The stone chosen for this well's rim was limestone, the same pale gray limestone that had been used for the shaft's interior lining. 3 large pieces, each roughly shaped into a curve, were fitted together to form a nearly complete circle. The stones were not perfectly matched. Perfection was not the goal, but they were close enough. The gaps between them would be filled with smaller stones and mortars, creating a solid, stable barrier. Moving these stones into position was its own kind of ordeal. Limestone is not particularly heavy as stone goes, but these pieces still weighed perhaps 200 pounds apiece. They were hauled to the site on a wooden sledge, pulled by a pair of oxen who seemed monumentally disinterested in the significance of their burden. Once at the well, the stones were maneuvered into place, using wooden levers and a great deal of profanity, though the profanity, being in Middle English, sounded less harsh than its modern equivalent. Medieval cursing had a peculiar lyricism to it. The workers positioned the first stone, adjusting it until it sat level and stable. Then the second, aligned so its curve matched the first with only a finger's width of gap between them. Then the third. The circle was not mathematically perfect. Medieval workers did not have access to precise measuring tools, but it was functionally sound. Water would not escape through those gaps. Buckets would not catch on uneven edges. Mortars was mixed, lime and sand and water, stirred to a thick paste that smelled alkaline and slightly bitter. This mortar would bind the stones together, fill the gaps, and harden over the course of several days into a solid mass. One of the older workers, a man who had done masonry work on the village church years ago, plied the mortars with practiced efficiency. He did not waste material. He did not make a mess. He simply worked, his hands moving with the automatic precision of someone who has performed this task countless times. While the mortar set, attention turned to the winch. A well without a winch is technically usable. You can lower a bucket on a rope and haul it up by hand. But this is exhausting, inefficient, and prone to accidents. Ropes slip. Hands lose their grip. Buckets spill. A winch is simple mechanical advantage that allows one person to lift. Wait, that would normally require 2 or 3s. Difference between a functional well and a convenient well? The winch for this well was made from oak, because oak was what you used when you needed something to last. Ash would have been lighter. Pine would have been cheaper. But oak had weight and density and a resistance to rot that made it the obvious choice for any structure that needed to endure. The main axle was a single piece, roughly 6 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh, turned on a lathe until it was nearly cylindrical. Nearly, close enough to wooden uprights. Each carved from split logs were set into the ground on opposite sides of the well, just beyond the stone rim. These uprights would support the axle, holding it horizontal at roughly chest height. The axle would rotate freely as medieval carpentry allowed it. Simple wooden bearings that had been carved into the tops of the uprights. Assembling the winch required patience. The axle had to be lifted into position, balanced carefully, and secured so it would not shift during use. Iron brackets would have been ideal, but iron was expensive and reserved for tools and weapons. Instead, the workers used wooden pegs and careful joinery, wedging everything together with a tightness that would hold under normal use and hopefully under extraordinary use as well. A crank handle was attached to one end of the axle. This handle was nothing more than a wooden rod, perhaps 2 feet long, set perpendicular to the axle and secured with a mortise-on tenon joint. The joint was reinforced with a wooden peg driven through both pieces, locking them together. Would it hold? Probably. If it broke, it could be replaced. This was the medieval approach to engineering. Build it well enough, and accept that maintenance is inevitable. The rope came next. Not the same rope that had been used during the digging. That rope was frayed and weakened, no longer trustworthy. A new rope, woven from hemp fibers, was purchased from a rope maker 2 villages away. It was thick as a thumb and rough to the touch, the kind of rope that would leave burns if you let it slide too quickly through your hands. One end was tied to the axle with a knot that the workers simply called the good knot, a name that conveyed both its reliability and the medieval lack of interest in formalized nomenclature. The other end was fitted with an iron hook, one of the few pieces of metalwork involved in the entire well construction, from which the bucket would hang. The bucket itself was wooden, bound with iron bands to prevent the staves from splitting. It held perhaps 2 gallons, large enough to make each trip worthwhile, small enough that even a child could manage the winch handle. This was important. Wells were used by everyone: women, children, the elderly. The mechanism had to be accessible to all. On a morning that was neither particularly warm nor particularly cold, neither sunny nor overcast, the winch was tested for the first time. One of the workers took hold of the crank handle and began to turn. The axle rotated. The rope wound around it, growing into a neat spiral. The bucket, hanging far below, began to rise. It worked not smoothly. The axle creaked. The rope scraped against the stone rim. The bucket spun slowly as it ascended, water sloshing gently inside. But it worked. The worker turned the handle with steady, even rotations, and the bucket rose, and when it finally appeared at the rim, dripping and heavy, there was a moment of quiet satisfaction. No one applauded. No one cheered. But several people nodded. One of the older men reached out and tested the bucket's stability, making sure the hook was properly seated. Another inspected the winch mechanism, checking for any signs of stress or failure. "Good," someone said, and that was the extent of the praise. The bucket was lowered again, allowed to fill, and drawn back up. This process was repeated a dozen times. Not because the water was needed, though it was collected and used, but because the system needed testing. Mechanisms fail. Weak points reveal themselves. Better to discover problems now, when they can be fixed, than later when someone depends on this water for drinking or cooking or washing. By midday, the testing was complete. The well was functional. The workers stood around it, these men who had spent months of their lives creating this structure, and they looked at what they had built. A stone-lined shaft, a smooth rim, a winch with a crank and a rope and a bucket. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would be remembered in chronicles or celebrated in songs, but it was real. It was solid. It was there, and it would still be there, in one form or another. Centuries later, in the medieval world, very little was allowed to exist without the approval of the church. A marriage required a priest. A death required last rites. Even the humblest structure, a new barn, a rebuilt bridge. A freshly dug well was expected to receive some form of ecclesiastical acknowledgement before it could be considered truly complete. And so, on a Sunday afternoon in early autumn, the village priest arrived to bless the well. His name, according to the scattered records, was Father Anselm. Though this may be a later invention by chroniclers who felt that all priests should have properly pious names. Medieval village priests were often younger sons of peasant families, men with just enough education to read Latin phonetically and just enough authority to command respect. They were not scholars. They were not theologians. They were administrators of ritual, performers of ceremony, and when necessary, mediators of local disputes. "Father, Anselm arrived at the well site accompanied by a small procession, 2 altar boys carrying candles, an elderly woman who served as the church's unofficial sacristan, and perhaps a dozen villagers, who had decided that attending a well blessing was marginally more interesting than spending Sunday afternoon mending fences or carding wool. The priest wore his vestments, which in a village this size meant a somewhat threadbare alb and a stole that had been embroidered by someone's grandmother decades ago. The colors green and gold had faded to something closer to moss and butter, but the intention remained visible. This was official business. This was the church making its presence known. The procession approached the well slowly, with a dignity that the structure itself probably did not warrant. The altar boys held their candles carefully, shielding the flames from the breeze. The sacristan carried a small bronze aspergillum, a tool for sprinkling holy water, along with a flask containing said holy water. The villagers followed at a respectful distance, unsure whether they were witnesses or participants. Father Anselm stopped at the edge of the well. He looked down into it not carefully, not with any real interest in its construction, but with the vague acknowledgement that this was, indeed, a well. Water could be seen at the bottom, a dark shimmer in the depths. The winch stood to one side, its rope coiled neatly on the axle. Everything was as it should be. The priest cleared his throat. This was the signal that the ceremony was beginning. From somewhere within his robes, he produced a small leather-bound book, a ritual manual, worn smooth by years of use. He opened it to a page marked with a strip of faded ribbon and began to read. The language was Latin, the same Latin that was spoken in churches from Rome to the Scottish Highlands. The universal language of the church that virtually none of the assembled villagers understood: Anetic, Domini, Fontem, Istem, bless, O Lord. This spring, ... The words rolled out, rhythmic and formal, pronounced with the particular cadence of someone who has recited the same text many times. Father Anselm's Latin was not perfect. His vowels were flattened by his native English. His pronunciation occasionally creative, but it was close enough. God, presumably, understood the intention even if the grammar was suspect. The villagers stood silently. They did not need to understand the words. They needed only to be present, to witness the fact that proper procedure was being followed. The well was being blessed. That was what mattered. Father Anselm continued reading. The prayer invoked various saints: Saint Benedict, Saint Bridget, others whose names were lost in the rapid mumble of rote recitation. It asked for God's protection over the water, that it might be pure and wholesome, that it might not become a source of illness or corruption. This was not an idle request. Medieval people understood, however imperfectly, that water could carry disease. They did not know about bacteria or parasites, but they knew that some water made you sick and some water did not. A blessed well, they hoped, would fall into the latter category. The prayer concluded. Father Anselm closed his book and handed it to one of the altar boys, who received it with the careful reverence of someone handling a valuable object, which, in a village where books were vanishingly rare, it was. Next came the aspergillum. The sacristan stepped forward and placed it in the priest's hand, along with the flask of holy water. Father Anselm unscrewed the flask's cap, a simple wooden stopper sealed with wax, and dipped the aspergillum into the water. The bronze head of the tool, perforated with small holes, came up dripping. He shook it over the well. Droplets fell, catching the sunlight briefly before disappearing into the darkness below. Some struck the stone rim and ran down in thin rivulets. Some evaporated almost instantly, leaving faint marks on the dry rock. A few reached the water at the bottom, where they merged seamlessly with the spring's slow accumulation. Father Anselm shook the aspergillum 4 more times, once toward each cardinal direction: east, south, west, north. This was symbolic, though the exact symbolism would have been difficult to explain even if anyone had asked. It felt right. It felt complete. And in medieval ritual, feeling was often more important than theology. The aspergillum was returned to the sacristan. The priest made the sign of the cross over the well, his hand moving in the familiar pattern: forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder. The gesture was mirrored less precisely by several of the watching villagers. In nomen Petrus, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen, murmured the crowd. And that was it. The blessing was complete. There was no dramatic transformation. The well did not suddenly glow with divine light. The water did not become clearer or taste sweeter. Nothing changed except the official status of the structure. It was now a blessed well, sanctioned by the Church, deemed acceptable for use by the faithful. This mattered more than any modern person might imagine. An unblessed well carried a faint taint of uncertainty. A blessed well was safe at least as safe as anything could be, in a world where death lurked in milk and bread and the very air you breathed. Father Anselm turned to address the assembled villagers. He did not launch into a sermon. This was not Mass. And he had other obligations to attend to before sunset, but he did offer a few words of encouragement. He reminded them that water was a gift from God, that they should be grateful for this well and maintain it properly. That cleanliness of body reflected cleanliness of soul. The villagers nodded at appropriate moments. They had heard variations of this speech before. At the blessing of the new millstones, at the dedication of the rebuilt church wall, at every minor ceremony that punctuated village life, the candles were extinguished. The procession reformed. Father Anselm and his small entourage walked back toward the church, their robes rustling softly in the afternoon breeze. The villagers dispersed, returning to their homes and their chores, the well blessing already fading into the background noise of daily life. But the well remained. Blessed now, official, part of the landscape not just physically but spiritually. It would provide water, as it was designed to do. And thanks to Father Anselm's hurried Latin and his dripping aspergillum, it would do so with the approval of heaven. Or at least, that was the hope. The well was finished. Or rather, the well was functional, which in medieval terms was close enough to finished. There would be maintenance, of course. There would be repairs. But the heavy labor, the months of digging and hauling and building were complete. The workers returned to their farms, to their other obligations, to the endless cycle of planting and harvesting that defined rural existence. And the well simply was, at first. Its presence was conspicuous. Villagers made excuses to walk past it, to look at this new thing that had been created in their midst. Children were warned to stay away from the edge, which naturally meant that children spent considerable time seeing how close they could get without being scolded. Women adjusted their routines, calculating whether the well was nearer than the stream, whether the effort of turning the winch was preferable to carrying water from the old source. Within a month, the well had become part of the landscape. Within 6 months, it was difficult to remember a time when it had not been there. This is how medieval villages absorbed change, slowly, quietly, without fanfare. The well was used daily, sometimes hourly. Women drew water for cooking and washing. Men filled barrels for livestock. Children were sent with buckets when the household supply ran low. The winch creaked with use. The rope grew smooth where hands gripped it. The stone rim developed a faint polish from the constant scrape of bucket and elbow. The water itself proved reliable. Not abundant, this was not a gushing spring that overflowed with generosity. The well never ran dry, even during the driest weeks of summer. The level dropped, certainly, but there was always something at the bottom. Always enough to fill a bucket. If you were willing to wait for the spring to replenish itself between draws, people stopped tasting it cautiously, stopped examining it for signs of contamination. It was just water. Good water. The well water. Years passed. In the 3rd year, a heavy rain caused part of the stone rim to shift slightly, creating a gap wide enough to be concerning. One of the original workers, now graying and slower, spent an afternoon remortaring the stones. No one thanked him. No one needed to. Maintenance was simply part of communal life. In the 5th year, the rope frayed through and snapped. A replacement was purchased, identical to the first, and life continued without interruption. In the 7th year, moss began to grow on the shaded side of the stones, a soft green carpet that spread slowly across the surface. Someone suggested scraping it off, but no one actually did. The moss was harmless, and there were always more pressing concerns. In the 10th year, The man who had supervised the well's construction did not dramatically, not memorably, but simply in the way that medieval peasants died, quietly. In his bed after a short illness, at his funeral, someone mentioned that he had been involved in building the well. This was noted and then forgotten. He was buried in the churchyard, and his name gradually faded from living memory. The well remained in the 15th year. A young woman who had been a child when the well was dug now used it daily, drawing water for her own household, her own children. She had no conscious memory of the construction, no recollection of the months of labor. For her, the well had simply always existed. When her daughter asked, "Who made the well?" she answered honestly, "I don't know." This is the nature of infrastructure. We inherit it, we use it, we assume it. The effort required to create it becomes invisible, erased by the passage of time and the routine of daily use. Only when it fails do we remember that someone, somewhere, had to build it. But this well did not fail. In the 20th year, a traveling merchant passing through the village drew water from the well and remarked that it was good water, clean and cold. The villagers accepted this compliment with the same polite disinterest with which they accepted most comments from outsiders. Of course, it was good water. It was their water. It had always been good. In the 30th year, the village priest, not Father Anselm, who had died a decade earlier, but his successor, a younger man with a sharper memory for doctrine and less patience for rustic superstition, passed by the well and absently made the sign of the cross. He had been told when he first arrived that the well was blessed, though he could find no record of the ceremony in the church's annals. He chose to take it on faith. The well had served the village for decades. It would continue to do so. In the 40th year, no one living could clearly remember the well's construction. There were vague stories, passed down through families. Someone's grandfather had worked on it. Someone's aunt remembered when the water first came. But the details were lost, smoothed away by the erosion of memory, just as the stone rim had been smoothed by the erosion of use, and still the well endured. The wooden winch was replaced eventually. Like stone, lasts longer than human memory, but not forever. The replacement was made from ash, because the carpenter who built it used what was available. It worked just as well. The bucket wore out, was replaced, wore out again. Iron hooks rusted and were swapped for new ones. The rope went through dozens of iterations, each one identical to the last, each one serving its purpose until friction and strain wore it thin. But the well itself, the stone shaft, the limestone rim, the spring at the bottom, those remained essentially unchanged. Water flowed in from underground channels that had existed long before humans ever settled this valley, and it would continue to flow long after they were gone. Generations came and went. The village itself changed, slowly. New families arrived. Old families died out. The church was expanded. The Lord's manor fell into disrepair and was rebuilt. Boundaries shifted. Crops rotated. Kings rose and fell, though their names and deeds barely registered in this remote corner of the kingdom. And through it all, the well provided water. Not because anyone maintained it carefully, not because anyone remembered its history, but because it had been built well enough, solidly enough, with just enough skill and just enough luck, that it could simply continue existing without requiring constant attention. This, perhaps, is the greatest achievement of medieval engineering, not the cathedrals or the castles, impressive though they are, but the countless small structures, wells and walls and bridges that were built to last without fanfare and did exactly that. By the time 100 years had passed, the well was old. Not ancient, not remarkable, just old. It was the well, the same way the church was the church, and the road was the road. It had always been there. It would always be there, and the people who drew water from it, day after day, year after year, never thought to wonder about the hands that had dug it, the backs that had bent over it, the hours that had been poured into its making. They simply lowered the bucket, turned the winch, and drank. Imagine, if you can, that you are standing at the edge of the well, not the well as it was in the beginning, when the ground was fresh turned and the workers' voices still echoed across the clearing, Not even the well as it was in the Middle Years, when it was simply a tool, a piece of infrastructure. Unremarkable and essential, no. Imagine the well as it is now, as it might be centuries after its construction, long after the village itself has changed beyond recognition, or perhaps disappeared entirely. The stone rim is still there, though weathered now, softened by hundreds of years of rain and frost, and the gentle abrasion of wind-blown dust. The mortar has crumbled in places, leaving gaps between the stones, but the structure remains fundamentally sound. Moss has claimed much of the surface, and in the cracks, small plants have taken root, stubborn weeds and delicate ferns that require very little soil and even less attention. The wooden winch is long gone. Of course, wood does not last centuries, not in the open air, not exposed to the endless cycling of wet and dry, freeze and thaw. Where it once stood, there might be a few rusted iron brackets, the remnants of some later attempt to modernize the mechanism, or there might be nothing at all. The site reclaimed by grass and wildflowers, but the well itself remains. You approach it carefully, aware that the ground around it may be unstable, that the stones may not bear weight as reliably as they once did. You rest your hands on the rim, feeling the coolness of the limestone, the rough texture of the stone beneath the moss, and you look down. Darkness, not the absolute darkness of a cave or a sealed room, but the deep, layered darkness of a shaft that descends far below the reach of sunlight. Your eyes adjust slowly, picking out variations in shade, the lighter gray of the stones near the top, the deeper black of the water below. It takes time to make sense of what you're seeing, to translate the jumble of shadows into something coherent, but eventually you perceive it. The water, still there, still seeping in from whatever underground source feeds it, still collecting at the bottom of the shaft, still doing what it has done for centuries. You drop a pebble not for any particular reason, just because the impulse is universal. The pebble falls, disappearing into the darkness, and a moment later you hear the faint splash as it strikes the surface far below. The sound echoes softly, repeating itself in diminishing waves, splash, 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 until it fades into silence. And then nothing. Just the well, and the darkness, and the water. This is what endures. Not the people who built it, their names are forgotten, their bodies long since returned to the earth. Not even the village they served. Villages grow and shrink, and sometimes vanish entirely. Their populations drawn away by economics or war, or simply the slow drift of time. What endures is the structure itself, the physical fact of the well, and the quiet persistence of the spring that feeds it. Historians sometimes speak of deep time. It's that almost incomprehensible scale on which geological processes unfold. But there is another kind of depth, equally profound, if less vast. The depth of human continuity. The well connects the present to the past, not through written records or monuments, but through simple persistence. Someone, centuries ago, decided that this spot needed water. They dug. They lined the shaft with stone. They installed a winch. They blessed it with holy water and Latin prayers, and it worked. Not perfectly, not spectacularly, but adequately. An adequacy compounded over centuries becomes something like permanence. If you listen carefully, and this requires stillness, requires patience, requires the willingness to let minutes pass without distraction, you might hear the water itself, not flowing exactly. Wells like this do not have the rushing current of a stream, but there is a quality to the silence, a faint suggestion of movement, water seeping through stone, of underground channels conducting their slow, invisible work. Or perhaps you hear nothing at all. Perhaps the well is simply silent, a vertical column of air and stone and darkness that holds no sound except what you bring to it. Either way, there is something deeply restful about it. This is not the rest of sleep, not the passive cessation of activity. This is the rest of completion, of a task finished and a purpose fulfilled. The well has done what it was meant to do. For decades, for centuries, it has provided water. And now, even if no one uses it anymore, Even if it serves no practical function, it continues to exist. A quiet testament to the labor and ingenuity and stubborn persistence of people whose names will never be known. You straighten, stepping back from the rim. Around you, the landscape stretches out fields, perhaps, or forest, with the scattered remnants of buildings that once housed the villagers who depended on this well. The world has moved on. Progress has made wells like this obsolete. Water comes from taps now, from pipes and pumps, and municipal systems that deliver. Thousands of gallons with the turn of a handle, but the well remains, because some things, once built, are difficult to erase. Stone resists. Earth holds. In springs, those slow trickles of water that seek their way through layers of rock and clay care nothing for human history. They flow as they have always flowed, as they will continue to flow long after the last human has drawn the last bucket. You imagine, for a moment, what it would be like to descend into the well. Not to fall nothing so dramatic, but to climb down slowly, hand over hand, finding footholds in the gaps between stones, feeling the air grow cooler as you descend, watching the light from above shrink to a distant circle of brightness down, and down, and down, until your feet touch water. It would be cold. You think? Cold and shockingly clear once the sediment settled. You would feel the stones beneath your feet, smooth and slick with algae. And you would know that you were standing where those medieval workers once stood, where the first seepage began, where the spring entered the world. And in that moment, you would be connected not through knowledge or study, but through the simple physical fact of occupying the same space. The well would hold you as it held them, patiently, indifferently, without judgment or memory, but you do not descend. You stand at the rim, and you imagine, and that is enough. Because the well is not asking to be explored. It is not asking to be remembered. It is simply being as it has been for centuries, as it will continue to be until stone crumbles and earth reclaims, and the spring finds a new path. And there is a profound peace in that. The peace of things that do not need you. The peace of structures that outlast their creators. The peace of water and darkness, waiting for no one, serving no purpose except to exist. You turn away, finally, leaving the well behind. Your footsteps are quiet on the grass, barely audible over the whisper of wind and the distant murmur of birds. The well does not notice your departure. It does not notice anything. It is stone and water and time, and it will be here long after you are gone. This is the end of the story. Not because anything has. It's been resolved. Medieval stories rarely resolve, but because there is nothing more to say. The well was built. The well worked. The well endures, and sometimes late at night. When the world is quiet and sleep comes slowly, you might think of it, that dark shaft, that patient spring, that monument to ordinary labor. You might think of the men who dug it, whose names are lost, whose lives were hard and short and largely unhappy by modern standards, but who nonetheless created something that lasted. You might think of the generations who used it, who drew water day after day without ever wondering about its origins, who took for granted what had been so difficult to build. You might think of the silence at the bottom of the well, that deep, abiding silence that has existed for centuries and will exist for centuries more, undisturbed by the chaos and noise of the world above. And you might find in that thought a strange kind of comfort, because the well does not care about your anxieties or your ambitions. It does not care about deadlines or disappointments or the endless, exhausting churn of modern life. It is simply there, holding water, holding darkness, holding time, and that, perhaps, is enough. The well is there. The water is there. The darkness is there, and slowly, gently, without effort or intention, you feel yourself begin to drift, down and down and down, into the quiet, into the stillness, into sleep. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine a world stripped of all the noise you know. No car engines humming in the distance. No refrigerators buzzing in the kitchen. No phones vibrating on nightstands. No ambient hum of electricity running through walls. Just silence. Deep, tangible silence the kind that settles into your bones and makes you aware of your own breathing. Now, into that silence, add something small. The soft whisper of sandaled feet on stone floors, the distant murmur of reed beds swaying beyond mud brick walls. And then, if you listen very carefully, you might hear the faint rhythmic scratching of a stylus pressing into damp clay. That sound, quiet as a secret, is the heartbeat of an entire civilization. Welcome to the world of ancient librarians, men and women, whose names have been swallowed by millennia, whose faces we will never see, but whose patient, repetitive work created something extraordinary. They didn't fight in battles or build towering monuments. They didn't write epic poems or discover new lands. What they did was simpler, stranger, and somehow more profound. They organized clay tablets, day after day, year after year, sometimes for their entire lives. These weren't ordinary tablets, of course. Each one was a small rectangle of river clay, roughly the size of your palm, covered in hundreds of tiny wedge-shaped marks. These marks pressed carefully into the soft surface before it dried were cuneiform, one of humanity's first writing systems, and each tablet was a fragment of memory made permanent. A merchant's accounts, a king's decree, a student's multiplication tables, a poem about gods and floods and the meaning of mortality. The librarians who managed these tablets lived in a world we can barely comprehend, a world where information couldn't be copied with a button press, where knowledge moved at the speed of human hands, where preservation required not just intention but extraordinary patience. To save a text meant to copy it, sign by sign, tablet by tablet, and then to file it away in exactly the right spot so that it might be found again perhaps years later, perhaps by someone else, perhaps after you yourself had turned to dust. There's something profoundly calming about this work. When you really think about it, in our age of endless stimulation and algorithmic chaos, where information floods past us faster than we can absorb it, there's an almost meditative quality to imagining these ancient workers bent over their clay, focused entirely on the task at hand, one tablet at a time, one cuneiform sign at a time, one careful placement on one specific shelf in one specific room. They worked by oil lamp when the sun set too early. They breathed air thick with clay dust. Their fingers developed calluses in the exact shape of their tools. They knew the weight of wet clay versus fired clay. They knew which tablets were too damaged to save and which could be copied one more time before crumbling away. They knew the smell of the kill and the particular silence of a storage room filled floor to ceiling with organized human thought. And here's the beautiful thing. The thing that makes this story perfect for drifting off to sleep. Their work was boring. Deliberately, beautifully, hypnotically boring. It had to be. Excitement means variation, and variation means error. These librarians sought the opposite: consistency, repetition, the soothing rhythm of routine, elevated into ritual. They were the guardians of stability in a world that was anything but stable. Empires rose and fell around them. Kings conquered and were conquered. Rivers flooded. Temples burned. But in the quiet rooms where the tablets were kept, the work continued, filing, cataloging, preserving, creating order from the chaos of human experience, one small clay rectangle at a time. So, tonight, as you settle into comfort and let your thoughts begin to slow, imagine yourself there, not as a warrior or a ruler, but as one of these patient keepers of memory. Feel the cool clay in your hands. Hear the soft scratch of the stylus. Smell the dust and lamp oil. And let yourself sink into the profound piece of work that matters precisely because it is slow, careful, and relentlessly, wonderfully ordinary. The library waits. The tablets are ready. And somewhere in the gathering darkness of ancient Mesopotamia, a lamp flickers to life, casting shadows across rows and rows of carefully organized human memory. Let's step inside. If we're going to understand the world of ancient librarians, we need to visit the place where their craft reached its most refined form. We need to travel back for 1,000 years to a city that no longer exists except as mounds of earth and broken pottery, but which once stood as the intellectual heart of Mesopotamia. We need to go to Nippur, Nipper sits in what is now central Iraq, roughly halfway between Baghdad and Busra, in the flat alluvial plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. But in 2000 BCE, Nipper wasn't just a city, it was the city, at least in matters of learning and religion. While other cities like Ur and Babylon competed for political dominance, Nipper remained apart, neutral, sacred. It was never a capital, never the seat of empire. Instead, it was something more lasting, a place of priests, scribes, and scholars. A place where knowledge was kept. Imagine approaching Nipper on foot, as a traveler might have done. The landscape is almost painfully flat, broken only by irrigation ditches and date palms. The sun is relentless, a white disk in a pale sky. You walk along a raised path beside a canal, the water moving sluggishly, reflecting nothing but light. And then gradually, you see it, the city rising from the plain. Its mud brick walls the same tawny color as the earth itself, so that from a distance it seems to have grown rather than been built. The walls are massive, 30 feet high in places, built from millions of sun-dried bricks. As you draw closer, you hear the city before you see inside it the bleating of goats, the calls of merchants, the rhythmic thud of someone pounding grain. The air smells of wood smoke and date wine and donkey dung and something else, something harder to identify, the dry, slightly acrid scent of old clay. You enter through a gate flanked by guards who barely glance at you. Inside, the streets are narrow, winding, shadowed by overhanging second stories and palm frond awnings. Children chase each other around corners. Women carry water jars balanced perfectly on their heads. A scribe sits cross-legged outside a merchant's house, taking dictation for someone who cannot write. And everywhere the same warm tan color mud brick and clay and dust. The entire city built from the same river mud that surrounds it. But you're not here for the markets or the residential quarters. You're here for the temple complex. The Temple of Enlil, King of the Gods. Lord of Wind and Storm, dominates Nipper's skyline. Its ziggurat, a massive stepped pyramid, rises over 100 feet into the Mesopotamian sky. But the ziggurat itself isn't where we're going. Instead, we're heading to the smaller buildings clustered around its base. Buildings that from the outside look utterly unremarkable. Low, rectangular structures with small windows, designed to keep out the killing heat of summer. These are the temple's administrative buildings. And hidden within them is one of the ancient world's greatest treasures. Library, step inside with me. The transition from bright sunlight to interior dimness is momentarily blinding. Your eyes adjust slowly. The temperature drops immediately. These thick walls keep out the heat remarkably well. The floor is hard-packed earth covered in red mats. And the smell. That smell you noticed from outside is much stronger here. It's the smell of thousands upon thousands of clay tablets. Some still slightly damp, others fired hard as stone, others crumbling slowly back into dust. The room you've entered is not large, perhaps 20 feet by 30, but every available surface is covered with tablets. They line the walls on brick shelving, stacked carefully according to a system you don't yet understand. They sit in woven baskets, they fill wooden crates, and in the center of the room, at a low table, a figure sits cross-legged, working by the light of an oil lamp even though it's midday. This is a librarian scribe, and he doesn't look up as you enter. He's copying something, his stylus moving with practiced precision across the surface of a fresh tablet, his lips moving slightly as he silently reads the text he's reproducing. The silence here is extraordinary. Outside, Nipper bustles and chatters and lives. In here, the only sounds are the breathing of the scribe, the faint hiss of the oil lamp, and occasionally the soft scrape of clay against clay as a tablet is moved. This is a place designed for concentration, for the slow, meticulous work of preservation along one wall. You notice something curious: small clay tags, each about the size of a bookmark, pressed into the bricks themselves. These are shelf labels, you realize. Each one bears a brief cuneiform inscription: omens, dreams, hymns, Enlil, royal correspondence, Yernamu, mathematical tables. The library is organized intentionally. carefully organized according to categories that made sense to these ancient minds. There are other rooms beyond this one, you discover. A room where clay is prepared, basins of water, piles of raw clay from the river, workbenches with tablets in various stages of completion. A room that's essentially a kiln, thick with smoke during firings, where tablets too important to risk water damage are baked into permanence. And another room, smaller, with a door that locks, where the most precious texts are kept, the canonical versions of myths and religious texts, the master copies from which all others are made. This is Nipper's library, though they wouldn't have called it that.